the real Peaky Blinders. They were an infamous Birmingham, England street gang, but they were never even remotely as powerful or as organized as the Shelby family from the hit BBC show Peaky Blinders that ran for 6 seasons from 2013 to 2022. Because of the popular TV series, a lack of many historical records and so many rumors made up and spread over the past century, much of what people think about the gang today is a lot more myth than reality. There was no Shelby family attempting to break into the racehorse scene. They never went up against the mafia, let alone actually defeated any mobsters. There were no razor blades sewn into their peaked caps, used to slash enemies when they least expected it. The history of the Peaky Blinders is muddy. They were never an official, highly organized gang like Billy Kimber's Birmingham Boys, who they did not defeat in real life. In fact, it was Billy who would put an end, it seems, to the Peaky Blinders. Billy was actually once a Peaky Blinder himself in real life. One of many Peaky Blinders, many of whom never pulled off any hijinks together. The name Peaky Blinder, while originally reserved in all likelihood for one group of gangsters who were closely affiliated, eventually was used to describe any number of Birmingham gangsters who dressed in a signature dapper style. The real Peaky Blinders were a group of juvenile delinquents, much more likely to steal your bike or throw a brick at you over something as inconsequential as looking at them the wrong way or drinking a ginger beer instead of one with alcohol in it. They were a group of rough and tumble miscreants, troubled youth, who grew up with nothing in the rugged slums of Birmingham and ended up joining loosely organized gangs full of other kids from the neighborhood who, for lack of a better description, just seemed cool. Kids who took no shit from anyone, not even the police. Kids who weren't afraid to take what they wanted, to fight anyone for any reason. Kids who dressed in smart suits and new crisp newsboy caps, cocked to the side and pulled down over one eye. Kids who were the toughest dudes in some really tough neighborhoods, who didn't have much in life other than some fancy clothes, a bit of someone else's cash in their pockets, and a tough guy reputation that made them a local celebrity. According to Professor Andrew Davies, who teaches modern social history at the University of Liverpool and whose self-stated principal research interest is the history of crime, they have been described as the first modern youth cult, and I think that really makes sense. Their clothing, their sense of style, their own language, they really do look like the full forerunners of the 20th century youth cults like punk. This description made me think about an old friend of mine, comic David Crow, who once told me about he was walking past some hardcore underground punk rock club late at night in downtown Seattle. This would have been in the late 80s. Some big muscled dude with dyed black hair, lots of piercings and tattoos and leather, wearing Doc Marten stomper-style boots that the British punk rock scene of the late 70s and early 80s originally popularized. This guy just popped out of the club, immediately just punched him right in the face. Hard enough to knock him down. This dude let out some kind of roar, then stomped off into the night with some of his punk buddies. This guy was punk rock, anarchy in the UK, or at least in Seattle. He dressed the part and he acted the part. The Peaky Blinders were the late 1800s and early 1900s equivalent of that guy. Someone who might hit you in the face just because your face was there, and they felt like punching somebody in the face. They were closer to anarchists than organized gang members. I came across in the research some people describing them as something akin to the UK's football hooligans of the 1970s. Right? These hooligans united by interest in a single team and often by whatever rough neighborhood they happened to grow up in. They were much more interested in kicking the shit out of the fans/other hooligans of rival teams, getting into massive bloody brawls that sometimes left dead bodies behind, than they were in their team actually winning matches. They were also usually poor, lacking in decent role models, and encumbered by a feeling of hopelessness regarding their future earning prospects. If they weren't ever going to get a good job or make it out of their shitty neighborhood, why not at least spread a little misery around? Get some local respect put on their name. Have a little nihilistic mayhem-fueled fun. The Peaky Blinders, while nothing like the Shelby family of the popular BBC show, they did terrorize and rule the mean streets of Birmingham for almost 20 years, and their historical story is worth telling. This week, we'll discuss the myths versus the reality of the real Peaky Blinders, how the gangs of Birmingham formed in Victorian England, some of the confirmed Peaky Blinders and their crimes, as well as the rise of Billy Kimber and the Birmingham Boys, and more, all on this historical fact versus fiction, gangster by order of the Peaky fucking Blinders edition of Timesuck.
This is Michael McDonald, and you're listening to Timesuck.
You're listening to Timesuck.
Happy Monday. Welcome to the Cult of the Curious. Back to a regular one-parter this week. Recording this before the last 2 episodes dropped, so still waiting to see if you like that or not. I'm Dan Cummins, the Suck Master, Black Young Jin's handler, He-Man fan, and you are listening to Timesuck. Hail Nimrod, hail Lucifina, praise be to good boy Bojangles, and glory be to Triple M. Did you know that Triple M, Michael motherfucking McDonald, just published a memoir? It's called What a Fool Believes. A sweeping, evocative memoir from the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, Grammy Award-winning platinum-selling singer-songwriter Michael McDonald. Written with his friend, Emmy Award-nominated actor, comedian, and #1 New York Times bestselling author Paul Reiser. Bummer, he does not seem to mention being one of the gods of the Timesuck podcast in his book. Strange. Triple M, he works in mysterious ways. Nevertheless, congratulations to Michael McDonald. I hope it's a bestseller. That is Nimrod's will. And now, it is time for the Peaky fucking Blinders. So here's how we're setting things up today. Since today's episode takes place in Birmingham, we'll first get to know England's second city. Then we'll examine some economic factors and the rapidly increasing population in we'll examine some economic factors and the rapidly increasing population in the late 19th century that led to Birmingham's so-called violent youth culture, gave rise to the loosely organized slogging gangs from which the Peaky Blinders emerged. I'll share some details of how these gangs operated, what types of crimes they committed. After that, we'll examine the Peaky Blinders, how they dressed, who some of their members were, how they operated. Next, we'll get into a bit of fact versus fiction, comparing the BBC show to the real history of the Peaky Blinders, before jumping into a timeline examining contemporary newspaper accounts from the late 19th and early 20th centuries of their crimes. Finally, I'll explain what led to the demise of the Peaky Blinders, and then we'll follow the subsequent criminal actions of Billy Kimber, most successful gangster who came out of the Peaky Blinders. Does that sound good? I'm going to assume you said yes. Or maybe even a fuck yeah, bro. The city of Birmingham, crown jewel of the British Empire, voted the UK's greatest city of peace and prosperity the last 17 years running in the Daily Telegraph's annual poll. Birmingham also voted the most beautiful city in the world in 1996, 2008, 2015, again last year in 2023 in a Condé Nast Travel Magazine readers poll. The UN, United Nations of all places, declared Birmingham the safest city in the world in both 2014 and 2019. It's made the top 10 every year since 1998, and its top lists of the best places in Europe to raise your kids for many years. There hasn't been a single violent crime in Birmingham since 2015. Now, I'm being incredibly sarcastic. Birmingham has long had the reputation, as in for over 150 years, of being one of the UK's roughest cities, with some of the most dangerous neighborhoods. Birmingham, according to the web, I've never been there personally, does not have a good reputation. I'm sure it has a lot of great neighborhoods and residents, but that's not what you hear about on the web. That's not what the folks over on YouTube seem keen to share with the world. When I typed Birmingham, UK, nothing else, into YouTube search bar to reconfirm how to pronounce the word properly, so I'm not saying Birmingham, the very first video that came up was titled UK's Worst City. The thumbnail art for that video simply states, Birmingham, I hate it. The video description, watch this video now to understand why Birmingham is the worst place in the world. Never come here. This video, and there's so many like it, but this video posted by YouTuber Geopold introduced me to the term Brummie, a word used mainly to describe someone from Birmingham, a Brummie, or the Birmingham accent, or something that's, comes from Birmingham. Here's Geopold, not sure what his real name is, interviewing a Brummie, known just as Danny G, about his home city and just, what he thinks about it.
Crime and that, but do you know something? Do you know when you get to a local park, yeah, and everybody's carrying, and that's the only place for you to go, because there's nothing else for you to do in Birmingham, right? Yeah. What are you supposed to do, man? They've got a local park, my local park's being dismantled right as we speak.
Yeah, we walked past it. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Jesus Christ, so now the kids ain't even got somewhere to play. That's why I want to leave Birmingham. It's the city itself. It keeps you down. It oppresses you. It makes you into a person you don't want to be. And while I live here, I can change somewhat to a certain degree, but I can never totally let it go. When I get out of this hole, and it is a toll, yeah, I will be able to totally transform into a new, better Danny.
I think so many videos, the word shithole is the word that comes up the most. Not, again, haven't been there. I don't know that it's a shithole, but a lot of people seem to think it's a shithole. After a video comparing Birmingham, England to Birmingham, Alabama in my search results, the next videos are inside Birmingham's no-go zone, crime, poverty, and despair in the UK's most dangerous city. Then a simple virtual tour video. There's those all over the web. Then a pros and cons video. Then Birmingham City Centre, this is bad. And the dark side of Birmingham, England. Again, clearly Birmingham has a rough reputation. I did another search and just added the word news, Birmingham, UK news, to see what, local news outlets or just news outlets in general are saying about Birmingham. A lot of murder. Crazy road rage attack caught on CCTV, one of the videos. Security camera footage of some masked men robbing a shop using machetes. Some dude sentenced to life for a series of just random stabbings around the town. Lots of stabbings. Lots of videos about stabbings. Birmingham seems in many ways as if it has not changed a lot since the days of the Peaky Blinders, since they ruled the city. Birmingham is the second largest city in the UK. That's why it's sometimes called the second city, with a population of 1.145 million in the city proper and a metro area population of 4.3 million. Located about 120 miles northwest of London in the West Midlands metropolitan county. West Midlands is a metropolitan county of central England that also has the reputation of being full of poverty and violence. When you just put in West Midlands, UK, and YouTube, not a lot of good coming back. Like pretty much everywhere, every metropolitan area in the UK, Birmingham is an old city. There have been various settlements in what is now Birmingham for over 10,000 years, since at least as far back as 8,000 BCE, based on archaeological discoveries. But the development of the area into the city we see today did not really begin until the 12th century CE. The city's first charter was granted in 1166. It wasn't until the 14th century that Birmingham became a significant settlement. Because there was no water transportation, no rivers, oceans, etc., the city did not develop rapidly until the 18th century, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. In the 16th century, the population was still less than 2,000 people. Very small. The population then grew from 15,000 to 70,000 from the late 1600s to the late 1700s. After the passing of the Reform Act of 1832, Birmingham elected its own members to Parliament. The city was properly incorporated 6 years later in 1838. That same year, railways to Liverpool and London were completed, which helped it grow immensely. In 1801, the population was 73,670. Over the next century, the population would explode, growing sevenfold, almost exactly, to 522,204 by 1901. So 73,000 to 522,000 in a century. Then over just the next 2 decades, the population added another 200,000 people for a total of 919,444 in 1921. It would take a full century to add another 200,000 people to reach the most recent population of 1.143 million, ascertained in 2021. So what drove the rapid growth between 1801 and 1921? The Peaky fucking Blinders, or the Industrial Revolution. Birmingham quickly became a massive factory town. For many, many years, metal, guns, jewelry, brass buttons, so much more were produced in Birmingham. Those first four, the buttons, the jewelry, the guns, the metal, the main products. But just some of so many different products. Engineers James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine, Matthew Bolton, a man who financed and introduced the steam engine, William Murdoch, a man who worked with Watt and Bolton on the steam engine and figured out how to use coal gas for lighting, as well as chemist Joseph Priestley, who discovered oxygen in carbonated water, and John, or maybe identified is better than discovered for oxygen. It's not like it wasn't around before him. He identified oxygen. And John Baskerville, a manufacturer and man who revolutionized commercial printing. These guys all lived in Birmingham during the Industrial Revolution and contributed greatly to its rapid technological progress. In the late 1700s, when the Industrial Revolution kicked off, Birmingham quickly became its British heart, and it only became more and more industrious heading into the 1800s. Birmingham, not London, is considered the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution in the UK. During World War II, the city was heavily bombed, but kept production going and was mostly reconstructed after the war. Still today, despite the Nazi World War II air raids, Birmingham remains one of the UK's largest manufacturing hubs, with over 100,000 people currently working in engineering and manufacturing mainly in light industry manufacturing, which is defined as the production of small goods that will be sold to the people who use them rather than to another manufacturer. Examples of light industries are food, paper, plastic, leather, textiles, wood, and household appliances. A lot of medium manufacturing also still done in Birmingham. It's a very blue-collar city. Medium industry, defined as medium-scale industry, is the industrial undertaking where more than 20 and less than 100 workers are manufacturing or processing goods with the aid of power or without the aid of power. So a lot of, small manufacturing centers. All this industry earned Birmingham the nickname of the city of 1,001 different trades. And now let's revisit crime in Birmingham, since crime is so central to this story. In the 1800s, as I just went over, the population of Birmingham exploded, jumped from approximately 70,000 to around 500,000 people by 1900. And while this massive population growth came with some benefits, people were moving to Birmingham thanks to the city continually adding new industrial jobs, and also came with a whole host of new problems, right? Poverty, unsanitary living conditions, increased crime. The UK website, Crime and Investigation, writes, during the Industrial Revolution, it was known as a city of 1,000 trades. I guess they added one later. Whereas Liverpool's wealth came from its docks or Manchester from its mills, Birmingham was incredibly diverse. The Industrial Revolution gave rise to a huge number of highly specialized, creative small firms, each profiting by exploiting niche areas of the market. Birmingham would and could make anything, from buttons and buckles to jewelry, steam engines, and guns. It was perhaps inevitable that its gangs would be equally innovative in their approach. Unlike the unemployed cornermen of Liverpool or the thrill-seeking teenage scuttlers of Manchester, the Birmingham gangs were professional criminals. In Victorian Birmingham, poverty was widespread. Most of all the new jobs, were low-paying ones. And poverty was a key factor that led to the formation of the Birmingham street gangs, like the Peaky fucking Blinders. And I'm not surprised, right? Isn't poverty and the feeling of hopelessness that so often accompanies poverty pretty much always the key factor in the formation of gangs in any given area? I mean, if an area is affluent or if everyone's just making enough money to pay for at least some version of the life that they want, there's not nearly as much incentive to risk incarceration to make some extra dough, is there? Many people in Birmingham and most of Europe experienced severe economic hardship or poverty in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and the poor were younger overall than they are now due to a shorter lifespan back then, which definitely helped give rise to youth gangs. A newborn boy born in England in 1841 was only expected to live to the age of 40. A newborn boy born in England today expected to live twice that long, to the age of 79. For girls, life expectancy in 1841 was 42. Now it's 83. Due to this, the population overall skewed much, much younger back then than it does today. Also, while I couldn't find stats for comparative purposes, anecdotally and based on a lot of 19th century British literature, it sure seems like there were a lot more orphans in England in the 1800s and now, which would make sense. If more people are dying young of disease, warfare, accidents, etc. during an era when doctors saved a lot less lives than they do now, then there's going to be a lot more orphans than there are now. And since the state did not take care of orphans in 19th century England, there would have been a lot more homeless young people having to fend for themselves than there are now, which, would lead a lot of youth directly into a life of crime and into joining up with fellow impoverished, neglected, disaffected youth, right? Gangs like the Peaky fucking Blinders. The crimes Birmingham youth committed during these days of the Peaky Blinders reek of rage, of people violently and impetuously lashing out at society in frustration over the state of their lives and feelings of hopelessness more than it does of sophisticated criminals running highly profitable crime enterprises, as you'll see in the timeline. Young gang members often robbed and pickpocketed just whoever happened to be walking through their neighborhoods. Wasn't a lot of planning in these crimes. Crimes of opportunity. Thieves often assaulted, beat, stabbed, strangled victims in just broad daylight. Another factor in the rise of youth gangs in the city, in addition to more impoverished young people, though there also wasn't the amount of law enforcement to stop or catch kids, as there is today, which of course provided that much more incentive to commit crimes. You're less likely to get caught. And also forming the gangs to protect themselves primarily from other young people committing the same type of crimes. In a BBC program called The Original Peaky Blinders, Britain's Biggest Dig, British historian and author Carl Chin, a man who seems to be the world's foremost expert on the real Peaky Blinders, he is cited in almost every article you will read about them, reported, poverty was widespread in Victorian Britain. There's this paradox of the wealthiest nation in the world with so much poverty. The poor are living in badly built housing, crammed into a tightly packed area, and then in Birmingham, London, all the big cities, Railway lines are being built. Whose homes are being knocked down for them? Poorer people. So this poverty, this state's seeming lack of care and respect for people living in these neighborhoods, all of this and more leads to an explosion of extreme youth violence in Birmingham by the late 19th century. Prior to the crime explosion, the streets of Birmingham were already filled with gambling dens and youth participating in a lot of rough sports like, boxing, rugby, other games that preceded rugby. There were few well-paying job opportunities or healthy outlets for boys and young men. So many turned to crime for cash, entertainment, a sense of pride. And I should say that those sports, rugby, box, it was not through like a proper leagues. It was just, kind of sloppily done. It wasn't like a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA or some kind of youth league, because that will come later and actually help the crime. But anyway, Carl Chin in the same interview speculated to the mindset of many of the young men and boys joining these gangs, saying, it's a hard world that they're living in, and hardness is a quality valued by young men. In a world where they are nothing, what's the only thing they can say they're better at than the better off? Fighting. And fighting seemed to be a big part of Peaky Blinder culture, as you'll see again when we get into the arrest reports and the timeline. These guys weren't coming up with clever ways to break into a bank vault. They weren't making money by running gambling halls. They were beating the shit out of people and taking shillings out of their pockets. They were breaking into local businesses, and then if they got caught in the act, they'd beat the shit out of the storekeeper. They were getting into pub brawls, punching cops who tried to arrest them. They were just tough guys. Something described by sociologists and cultural anthropologists as a violent youth culture began to form in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in Birmingham. Although crime was already common in the Birmingham and other large cities, this new wave of crime went beyond pickpocketing, burglary, and theft. Youth began to more frequently engage in more violent assaults, stabbing, stranglings. Author Philip Gooderson wrote in his book, The Gangs of Birmingham. There, the Peaky Blinders' existence had been largely forgotten until recently, when our contemporary concern with the rise of juvenile as opposed to criminal gangs, first in the USA and then in Britain and elsewhere, opened our eyes to hidden elements in our Victorian past. Youth is now a precious commodity that we are anxious to put to good use. Youth in 1870 was abundant and was swamping Victorian cities in a surge of humanity caused by the high birth rate and by the demands of the industrial economy for cheap labor. These urban children had to learn quickly to survive. They were expendable. In the 1850s through the 1870s, the Victorian middle class pressured the police to crack down on rough sports and youth gambling in the poorer sections of Birmingham. In 1853, the Betting Houses Act outlawed cash betting outside of race courses. In April 1858, Birmingham Daily Post article directly connected street gambling to police assaults. By the 1870s, these tough kids, these so-called roughs, started joining forces and forming fighting gangs. And this led to the rise of the infamous slogging gangs that would give birth to the Peaky fucking Blinders. In the 1820s to the 1840s, the term slogger was used to describe someone who struck an opponent with a heavy blow in a fist fight, typically in a boxing match. This term would later be used for street gangs full of punch-happy delinquents. Young people in Birmingham formed slogging gangs in their free time, as in when they weren't working. These early sloggers, they weren't full-time criminals. They were dudes who basically liked to fuck people up, make some extra money when they weren't at work. They were typically between the ages of 12 and 25. On Saturdays after work and on Sundays, instead of going to watch a game or head to the gym, these guys go to the movie theater. These guys would gather at local cemeteries that would later be converted to parks. They didn't have city parks this time. They'd gather at pubs and on street corners and just cause some mayhem. The idea of a gangster who can't meet up with his fellow gang members to fight a rival gang or shake down some shopkeeper because they have to go to work at some belt buckle or boot factory really cracks me up. These guys, they did have regular jobs. They had regular jobs, and in their free time, they would cause mayhem. That's so funny to me. Arthur, we need you around the King's Head pub tomorrow, mate. Shaking them down at noon, yeah? Noon, yeah? Yeah, Arthur, noon. We need your muscle, mate. We need all the right proper sloggers we can get, yeah? I would like me to crack some skulls, Roger, dust off my brickbats. I'd right like to split the skull of that cunt bartender, Tommy Walker. I know you'd cut him down right proper, mate. That's why we need you. Thing is, I'm on shift at the buckle factory till 4 o'clock. Anyway, you can push off, robbing that prick for just a few hours. No, we can't, mate. Dewey's got to be to work at the teapot factory by 2. Just made supervisor. Making an extra 3 shillings a day, he is. Rabbit don't start his shift at the porcelain doll factory till 4. Can't lose a job, mate. He's had to work 3 months since getting laid off from the pickle plant. Polly will have his head. It's got to be noon. Right. Well, there it is then. I'll have to miss this one, Roger. But I'm still on for the knife fight on Saturday, since that's my day off. Those guys might have morphed into Australians at some point in there. These guys weren't working their day jobs. There were people who did not want you did not want to meet in a dark alley. They weren't afraid to not only assault whoever walked into their neighborhood, rival gang members, the police. Many of these sloggers would become the initial Peaky Blinders. Slogging gangs would fight in battles for control, primarily of the Birmingham inner city areas of Small Heath and Cheapside. Rough teens began fighting in mass brawls that would sometimes last for hours. That's what it says in some of the sources, hours. No thanks. I have a hard time wrapping my head around how a brawl could go on for hours. I've done some like boxing workouts off and on, took some martial arts classes, here and there when I was younger. It's fucking exhausting. Sparring is exhausting. I have so much respect for boxers, kickboxers, MMA fighters, wrestlers, anyone who fights in combat sports. Not just for the courage it takes to go up against somebody in a ring fighting them, and to be able to withstand the punishment that you're going to get receive, but also it's just incredibly physically taxing, just aerobically, right? Even if you just punch a heavy bag, if you haven't done it before, you'll be shocked at how much energy it takes just to stand there and punch something. How do these guys fight for hours? Must have been a lot of breaks, a lot of watching other people fight. Then you get in, fight for yourself, then you take a little break, watch again. I want to bash you fucking skulling, Jack. Just need to take a sit for a spell, mate. Just maybe rest me knuckles, do some hamstring stretches, focus on my breathing. Then I'll be right bashing you to shite with a brick. The Cheapside Slogging Gang was the most brutal of the early Birmingham youth gangs. They formed sometime around 1870, led by two young men initially, John Adrian and James Grinrod. They were known primarily for their weapon of choice. This is a fucking horrible weapon. A heavy buckled belt that they would use to pummel the shit out of both male and female victims so they could mug them, start fucking whipping you with the belt buckle. And this fighting style would be emulated by other sloggers of the day and later by the Peaky Blinders. They would take off their leather belts, wrap, half or so of the belt around one of their hands, form a fist, and then just whip a heavy metal belt buckle into their victims. A buckle that later would be sharpened into the edges would be sharpened. So it would slice you in addition to bludgeon you. Imagine getting hit with that. Also, how many of you just thought about how fun it would be to whack somebody with a belt? Maybe with a small buckle. Right? High school, maybe even college me. God, I would have loved to whip some fools around with a belt. It'd probably be so satisfying. Kyler Monroe and I this past year started doing this thing where we'll slap each other in the face with a wallet. You might think that they started that. No, it's me. What you do is you wait until the other person's not paying attention, and then you just hold your wallet in a way so that you're holding just one half of a wallet that folds out from the middle, and you swing the wallet open, again, you're holding that one half, and then the other half just whips out and ideally just gets a nice, satisfying smack on the cheek of who you're trying to hit. Just a pop. Oh, it feels so good. I hit Monroe on real good on an escalator at the Logan Airport in Boston. She was going down one escalator. I was on another, both going down. She wasn't paying attention. We were parallel to each other. And I just got just a nice solid smack. And she got so mad, she chased me for legitimately probably 5 minutes through the airport. And then she got me back later so hard, I didn't want to play anymore. Kyler got me so hard in the ear, my ear rang for a bit. And it wasn't quite as much fun after that. But doing it to other people, that is satisfying. In addition to belts, the sloggers used their fists to fight. They also kicked each other with steel-toed boots, stabbed one another with small knives, and they like to throw bricks at one another. Like to throw bricks at the police, mugging victims, whoever. They fucking loved a brick. No one has ever loved to throw a brick more than the Peaky fucking Blinders. At least one police officer in Birmingham in the late 1800s was beat to death with bricks. They did not, like on the Peaky Blinders TV show, slice each other with razor blades, though, hidden in their hats. Rival gangs soon formed to fight the initial sloggers, the Cheapside Slogging Gang, for their territory. Land grabs, or taking over a neighborhood, became the primary goal of each street gang, like the Peaky Blinders. Who had control of the neighborhood? Who owned, their street, their corner? Soon it seemed like youth gangs had taken over all of Birmingham. But again, many probably not affiliated with one another. And also, many, if not most of the members, were Irish. This episode ended up reminding me a lot of the Irish mob suck, episode 343. Tensions between Catholic Irish immigrants and British Birmingham Protestant residents were a core cause of the violence between the slogging gangs. During the Great Famine, a.k.a. Great Hunger, a.k.a. the Irish Potato Famine that began in 1845 and lasted until 1852, that led to roughly 1 million Irish deaths, a ton of Irish immigrated to England. Irish population in Birmingham alone doubled between 1841 and 1851. And it wasn't like, middle class or rich Irish were coming over. It was just almost exclusively dirt poor, half-starved Irish who ended up living in the slums of Birmingham and faced harsh discrimination. And Birmingham's English natives, they did not welcome these Irish immigrants. into the city with open arms. In June of 1867, an estimated 100,000 English protesters destroyed and looted an unknown number of Irish homes in various riots across Birmingham that became collectively known as the Murphy Riots. Then, instead of protecting the Irish and making arrests, the police sided with the rioters. They didn't like them either. The Irish, unsurprisingly, became more protective and territorial of their communities in Birmingham and started to rely on each other and local gangs rather than law enforcement. One of the first Irish sloggers following these riots was Thomas Joyce, a laborer whose parents were from Ireland and then moved to Park Street in Birmingham. Joyce watched his family home get destroyed during these riots. He went on to become the leader of the Park Street gang. It was known for being particularly brutal in a fight. On April 8, 1872, the Birmingham Daily Post reported on a slogging gang riot, one of the first time these sloggers were mentioned in print. On April 7th, a large body of roughs had gathered in the neighborhood of Cheapside. Watch out for the roughs! About 400 people caused a massive disturbance, destroyed shop windows before moving on to Hill Street, throwing bats and stones, a lot of bricks at storefronts there. Sadly, as is so often the case with riots, the rioters did most of their damage in their own neighborhood before they took the violence to another neighborhood full of some of their oppressors. Not that random innocent people living in this other neighborhood also deserved to have their businesses busted up or homes destroyed. The slogging gang harassed passerby in the area for several hours until the police arrived to break it up. The sloggers then fled towards Cheapside, were met by another group of police officers. Each person arrested was fined 20 shillings or spent 3 weeks in prison. Over the next few years, slogging gangs were involved in countless assaults and stabbings. One judge said in 1877 at the Northampton Assizes, which is like a court system over there that used to exist, night after night, the streets of Birmingham became the scene of an almost irrepressible violence and brutality. Thomas Gilbert, also known as Kevin Mooney, was involved in a lot of this violence and brutality. He is one of the original Peaky Blinders. There's a lot of speculation that the character of Thomas Shelby, leader of the BBC version of the Peaky Blinders, is at least partially based on Gilbert. Gilbert was a main instigator of these early land grabs. Under him, the Blinders would become a known gang that operated mainly in the Cheapside and Small Heath areas of Birmingham. Let's now discuss how the Peaky Blinders operated, how the TV show influenced our perception of this street gang. Peaky Blinders operated in Birmingham from the late 1880s to the 1910s. They were mostly comprised of young criminals from the bottom rungs of Birmingham's economic ladders in its worst neighborhoods and were often of Irish descent, as I mentioned. They committed crimes like robbery, beatings, racketeering, illegal bookmaking and gambling, and occasionally even murder. But as you'll see, some real senseless murders as opposed to strategic hits, like you'd see with an organized crime outfit like the Mafia. Many of the Peaky Blinders often wore signature outfits, tailored jackets, lapelled overcoats, buttoned-up waistcoats, silk scarves, bell-bottom trousers, leather boots. They're now iconic peaked flat caps, a.k.a. newsboy or baker boy caps. Dressing dapper was part of being a Peaky fucking Blinder. Just like kicking ass in street fights, it just made them feel important, I'm guessing. Peaky Blinders, after defeating other rival gangs, terrorized much of Birmingham for almost 2 decades. By 1910, the Birmingham Boys, led by Billy Kimber, had taken over. Billy Kimber, being a former Peaky Blinder himself. Following the demise of any actual gang, their legacy would remain for decades. The name Peaky Blinder would become slang for all street gangs in Birmingham, just like the term slogger was a few decades before. The original Peaky Blinders started in Small Heath, an area of Birmingham about 2 miles from the city center. In the 19th century, it turned into a place for the wealthy to escape the inner city, but then, as Birmingham further industrialized and more factories downtown led to the need for more workers near downtown, the area became working class and full of terraced housing estates, a.k.a. row houses, big blocks of homes with shared walls with the homes on either side of them. The Blinders' first activities, I mentioned, mostly focused on occupying favorable areas of Birmingham like Small Heath and Cheapside. And their first rival was the Cheapside Sloggers. After gaining territory, the Blinders ramped up their criminal activity, kind of. Most historians agree they were, more focused on fighting, robbery, and racketeering than the highly organized crime depicted in the TV show. For example, the Blinders participated in something called constable baiting, or attacks on police officers. At least 3 officers were killed by Peaky Blinders. The Peaky Blinders beat their victims with those belt buckles, like I mentioned earlier, metal-tipped boots, fire irons, canes, knives, and revolvers, primarily. We don't have a lot of historical records about the gang, and a lot of what we do have just unearthed in 2013. Photos and records of the Peaky Blinders were hidden away in the West Midlands Police Museum at the back of the Sparkhill Police Station for over 100 years. From the records rediscovered in that police station, we now know a bit about some of their members. Remember Henry Lightfoot. Oh, he's a fun one. We're going to get to know him a lot in the timeline. Infamous for his extensive criminal record. A lot of really dumb crimes. First photographed by the Birmingham City Police in 1904. Philip Gooderson, the author of The Gangs of Birmingham, wrote, Lightfoot was a hardened rough rather than a slogger, and many of those later dubbed Peaky would not have the extensive criminal record that he had acquired. Kevin Mooney, a.k.a. Thomas Gilbert, right, the OG Peaky Blinder we met, also had a lengthy criminal record. Gilbert was born in 1866. He was 38 at the time of his being arrested and photographed in 1904, making him a lot older than most members of the Peaky Blinders. Worked as a fishmonger for his day job. He was arrested in October of 1904 for false pretenses, claiming to be someone he was not when questioned by the police, running some scams. We'll learn about that later. A 13-year-old member, David Taylor, arrested in 1904 as well for carrying a loaded gun. 19-year-old baby-faced Harry Fowles, arrested for stealing a bicycle. There's not major crimes usually. In 1904, Harry was born in 1885, described as having light brown hair, gray eyes, and a pale face. His listed occupation was barman. 19-year-old Ernest Hayes, also arrested that day for stealing a bike. 24-year-old Stephen McHickey broke into a shop in October of 1904, received an 8-month sentence. He was born in 1879, had black hair, brown eyes, a sallow complexion, had tattoos of a woman on his left and right arms. One of the names was Louisa. His listed occupation was metal roller, guy who operated rolling and milling machines to flatten, temper, form, and reduce sheet metal sections and to produce steel strips. So one of the city's many factory workers when he wasn't causing mayhem. The West Midlands police described Fowles, McHickey, and Hayes as Peaky fucking Blinders. No, they were described as foul-mouthed young men who stalked the streets in drunken groups, insulting and mugging passersby. Many of the original Peaky Blinders would go on to fight in World War I, but unlike in the BBC show, by the time that war was over, so were the real Peaky Blinders. Henry Lightfoot joined the army, fought in the Battle of, I forgot to look this pronunciation up. Somme, perhaps? Somme? S-O-M-M-E in France? I don't even know if it's in France. It was a battle. He fought in a battle in 1916. Henry Fowles was buried alive for 12 hours in a trench following a mortar bombardment. After being removed from the trench, he could not speak or see for a long period of time. According to historian Corinne Brazier, he made a living after the war for a while by selling postcards of himself dressed as a female nurse. And I wish we had more info on that, Corinne. Were the postcards supposed to be comical or sexy? Did he sell a ton of these postcards? Were they a huge hit? A massive success? Or was he hanging out on a downtown street corner, mostly telling people to be on the lookout for aliens, trying to read their minds, who sometimes, then sometimes he was also like, hey, check out my postcard. I was a fine young lass, yeah? I could bugger myself if I would. Now that we know the history of the Birmingham street gangs and have briefly met a few of their members, let's talk about some of the myths that have muddied the truth about the Peaky Blinders. Where does the name Peaky Blinders come from? The popularized myth is that the Peaky Blinders, sewed razor blades into the peaks of their flat caps, used them as makeshift weapons, right? They'd blind you with this razor blade. Down you go by order of the Peaky fucking Blinders. However, that origin story almost certainly bullshit, because Gillette produced the first disposable safety razor in 1903 in the U.S. First manufacturing factory opened in Great Britain in 1908, meaning that the Blinders using disposable razor blades as weapons in their heyday, very, very unlikely. Where does that myth come from? Well, it comes from a 1977 novel, in all likelihood, called A Walk Down Summer Lane, written by Birmingham author John Douglas. He wrote that hats were used as weapons by Birmingham gang members who would headbutt their enemies, blind them, or slash their foreheads, which would cause blood to fall into their eyes. Then they couldn't see to fight. He wrote that some men wore a peaky blinder, and the peak was, quote, usually slit open in pennies or razor blades or pieces of slate inserted and stitched up again. The caps were, quote, whipped off the head, swiped across the opponent's eyes, momentarily blinding them or slashing their cheeks. I doubt it. Historian and author Carl Chin thinks this is bullshit. According to Chin, there's no evidence to suggest they kept blades in their hats. He told an interviewer for the website IloveManchester.com, I've gone through hundreds of court cases and newspaper articles. There was absolutely no evidence. That's a myth that emerged actually in the late 1920s, he said in the papers, and took off in the 50s. And then I guess that guy wrote that book about it. According to Chin, the Blinders used their boots and belt as their main weapons. They wanted to maim, they were vicious men, but they were not big gangsters like we see in films. A few, like Billy Kimber, went on to become major gangsters, but that was a minority. In a video for a BBC interview, he demonstrated, Carl did, how ineffective this razor blade hat situation would be. He sold me, right? How in the heat of battle, if you went to grab your hat, you'd be more likely to slice yourself than you would be to slice someone else. And right, this is a chaotic moment. And also, you'd have to take off your hat to slice somebody, pull it back, then kind of whip it forward to slice someone at close range. And if you're going up against some other tough guy, when you pull your arm back to whip that razor blade, they're just going to fucking punch you in the mouth, or worse. Right? I went back and watched some scenes of the Shelby boys slicing up dudes with their hats on the TV stories. It is pure just cinema fiction. Right? That shit would never work in a real fight. Get the fuck out of here. Or not like, maybe 1 in 1,000 times. Chin believes the name is a reference, Peaky Blinders, to the Blinders, quote, sartorial elegance. Sartorial being defined as related to tailoring, clothes, or a style of dress. The slang term peaky referred to flat caps with peaks, just the hats they wore. Those were peakies. And blinder was slang at the time in Birmingham for somebody who was an especially stylish or dapper dresser. So they were just, guys who dressed well and wore those flat caps. And as I gone over, they were a stylish bunch. They wore tailored clothing, very uncommon at the time for gang members and petty criminals and thugs. Most of the blinders, wore that flat cap. They wore an overcoat, wore their hair cropped on the sides with a little quiff in the front, a little pompadour-like hairstyle, kind of cocked off to one side, which would peek out from under their hats. They like to pull the peak of their hat down over one eye, have their hair, just a little fashion statement, kind of popped out of the other side. They wore tailored suits with bell-bottom trousers and button jackets. Members with more money wore silk scarves, starched collars with metal-type buttons. Their wives, girlfriends, mistresses wore luxurious clothing like pearls, silk, colorful scarves. Just like with the hardcore punk scene I referenced earlier, right? They had a dress code. I imagine it made them, again, feel cool and special, stating that they were badasses, tough guys not to be trifled with. And also, the Peaky Blinders outfits distinguished them from members of other gangs, which is important in a big chaotic brawl. Reminds me of the Bloods and Crips, right? Wearing either red or blue. When you're attacking different people, when there's bodies flying all around, it'd be nice to kind of be able to quickly recognize who's on your side, who's not on your side. The clothing also symbolized wealth, luxury, and power. Qualities the Blinders, may not have actually had much of, but very much desired. And their dress code may have also been a statement against the police. Even though the Blinders were easily identifiable because of their clothing, the police, often still could not do much to stop them. Just a little fuck you to the authorities. One more thing, and this is just pure speculation. The Peaky Blinders may have also enjoyed dressing like they did because they were neighborhood celebrities. Notorious street criminals in the late 19th and early 20th centuries were the closest thing Birmingham would have to today's reality TV stars. And the middle class in Birmingham was obsessed with reading stories about them. Dr. Eloise Moss, a professor at Manchester University, specializing in modern British history with a focus on crime, said in an interview with the Daily Mail, if you think about how popular reality TV is today, it's the Victorian version of that, of finding out what's going on in your local area, the crimes that have been committed, the bad guys, the scandal. So it becomes a lot more exciting to read. It is the birth of the modern tabloid press. Crime is the most commercial form of entertainment news in Victorian Britain. They're doing something people can only really aspire to, breaking the rules. It can be seen as a form of social mobility. You may well want to be featured by the press if you're a member of a gang in this period, because it gets your name out there. You become notorious. One unfortunate difference between the BBC Peaky Blinders and the real Blinders was they were not good to women. One gang member's girlfriend told a reporter for the Birmingham Weekly Post, he'll pinch you and punch you every time he walks out with you. And if you speak to another chap, he don't mind kicking you. No, I shouldn't like him as well if he didn't knock me about a bit. And dear God, that is a sad quote. Holy shit. That poor unnamed woman clearly was raised to associate love with violence, assuming her father beat her as well, or beat her mother, or most likely beat them both. And then she repeats the cycle of abuse as an adult since it has a dark, nostalgic comfort to it. Another example of Peaky Blinder women abuse is the murder of 18-year-old Emily Pym, called the Summer Lane Kicking Case. In November of 1898, 18-year-old gang member James Harper kicked and stomped on Emily for breaking a jug over his head. Yeah, just stomped her to death, sentenced to just 6 years in jail after that because the judge didn't want him to spend the rest of his life in prison. Okay, about to jump into the timeline now. But first, let's check in with Stephen Knight. This is the guy who created the BBC TV show, to hear how much of real life he based his series in. Knight told Jonathan Wright from HistoryExtra.com that his inspiration for the show came mainly from his father's encounter with some local gangsters. As a boy, his dad told him he was once sent to deliver a message. Said he encountered a group of 8 well-dressed men sitting around a table covered in money. They were smoking, they were drinking, they were wearing peaked caps, right? Nice suits, guns in their pockets. According to Knight, just that image, smoke, booze, and these immaculately dressed men in the slum in Birmingham. I thought, that's the mythology. That's the story. That's the first image I started to work with. It's very loosely based in truth. Knight's father's uncle was a Peaky Blinder. His family told him brief stories about some gang fights, men dressed in suits. Knight said in another interview, my parents, particularly my dad, had these tantalizing memories of from when he was 9 or 10 years old to these people. They were incredibly well dressed. They were incredibly powerful. They had a lot of money in an area where no one had money, and they were gangsters. In another interview, one I read early in my research, and sadly I could not find again, Knight said something to the effect of not letting truth get in the way of a good story when it came to the Peaky Blinders. Essentially, while they were real, when it came to individual characters, the types of crimes they committed, how organized they were, etc., how powerful, he didn't let historical fact get in the way of entertainment. And, that take worked out very well for him. Over 6 seasons, the show has won countless awards, was loved by critics. Episodes in its final 2 seasons were watched by over 5 million viewers in just the UK on BBC, and it was picked up and distributed worldwide by Netflix. And a movie, in place of a 7th season, is expected to come out sometime later this year or early next year. All right, now let's meet some of the real Peaky Blinders mentioned earlier and discuss the original newspaper accounts of their crimes in today's Timesuck timeline.
Strap on those boots, soldier. We're marching down a Timesuck timeline.
The Birmingham Daily Mail reported on trials of prisoners on January 5th, 1888. This is the earliest account we have of somebody who would later be identified as a Peaky Blinder being arrested. 16-year-old Henry Lightfoot indicted for stealing a woolen jacket. So yeah, not exactly a major crime. Wasn't picked up for dealing a kilo of cocaine, running a prostitution ring, or for murder. Just a kid arrested for stealing a jacket. By order of the Peaky fucking Blinders, my jacket now. November 18th, 1887, a young boy had witnessed him stand on another boy's shoulders. So sad. Pull down the jacket like something out of a fucking Orphan Annie type movie. Jacket was hanging over the entry of his shop on Coventry Road. Lightfoot and the young man were both arrested, but the second boy not identified in the paper. Lightfoot was found guilty, sentenced to 6 months of hard labor and a year of supervision for this crime. This was his 3rd conviction in a year. The judge warned him that he would be sentenced with penal servitude if he continued committing crimes. Peaky Blinders as a criminal organization first mentioned in the news March 24th, 1890 for the brutal attack of a young man named George Eastwood. And this is absurd. This is not the kind of crime you'd expect the Shelby clan to commit on the show. Well, maybe Arthur would do this. Arthur would absolutely do this. Still, it's so stupid. This poor Eastwood guy crossed Coventry Road, a blinder hotspot, stopped in for a drink at the Rainbow Pub, where he ran into Peaky Blinder Thomas Mucklow and his accomplices. And his night took a hard turn for the worse. On the night of this attack, March 22nd, 1890, Thomas Mucklow and his buddies beat the fuck out of Eastwood, all because they saw him order a non-alcoholic ginger beer. That seems to be it. These assholes started mocking him for ordering a soda, and they made fun of him so bad he left. And then, not satisfied with running him out of the pub, they followed him home. George left around 11 p.m. and as he was walking down under the Adderley Street Viaduct, he heard some men shouting at him, turned to see who they were, saw the men were approaching him. One of them was Thomas Mucklow, another was some goon named Groom, and the third assailant was unidentified. When they caught up to him, they let him have it. They punched him several times. There was several guys hit him, at least 3. He falls to the ground. Now they start to kick him with their boots, and they start to whip him with those belt buckles. Eventually, after taking a lot of damage, George somehow manages to get up and run away. A man named Mr. Turner took George in when he showed up bloody on his doorstep, banging on his door. George was taken to the hospital, suffering from, quote, serious bodily contusions. His head was fractured and his scalp cut in 2 or 3 places. He needed a trepanning operation. That is, a hole was drilled into his head, right, because his brain was swelling. And then he spent 3 weeks recovered in the hospital. Here is the account from the newspaper article dated March 24th, 1890 in the Birmingham Mail, titled Murderous Outrage at Small Heath, a Man's Skull Fracture. Again, the earliest written evidence of the Peaky Blinders. It seems that Eastwood called between tea and 11 o'clock at the Rainbow Public House in Adderley Street and was supplied with a bottle of ginger beer. Shortly afterwards, several men known as the Peaky Blinders gang, whom Eastwood knew by sight from their living in the same neighborhood as himself, came in. They immediately commenced making offensive remarks about his being a teetotaler and drinking ginger beer. He merely appealed to the landlord, like the pub owner, as to whether or not he was at liberty to call for what he liked, when one of the party tripped him up from behind. So he's like, oh, can I just order what I want here? And now they knock him down to the ground. So he decides to leave, knowing the gang is dangerous. The gang was still nearby. They followed him down Adderley Street to a place where two bridges cross. By that point, Thomas Mucklow shouted, now, boys, give it him hot. Give it him hot, boys. Then it says, then they commenced striking him with their fists, and Eastwood tried to defend himself. Eventually, he was overpowered by a terrible blow from a buckled belt, dealt, he alleges, by a man named Groom. He fell, and whilst on the ground, he was kicked about the road and was struck several times about the head with buckled belts. God damn, that would hurt. At last, Eastwood gained his feet and, chased by the mob, ran as far as the back entrance to Alcock Street Board School, and by scaling the wall, crossing the playground, and then climbing another wall, got into Alcock Street, where he took refuge in the house of Mr. Turner. I know I'm a child, but now that I've trained my brain to look for dick references, it's uncanny how many show up. Alcock, Allcock Street. Okay. George was bleeding profusely from his injuries, said. The gang shouted outside Mr. Turner's house, we'll kill him if we cop him. It was almost midnight before they could get George to the hospital, right? They had to wait for these fuckers to leave. They couldn't actually call him on the phone because those weren't a thing. George was covered in bruises. His skull was badly fractured. He had a scalp wound so deep that doctors could see his bone. They fractured his skull with those belt buckles in all likelihood. All because he didn't drink alcohol. And I'm guessing, they just didn't like the looks of him. Just a little case of, you think you fucking better than me? With your fucking ginger beer, you fucking wanker? Too good to drink with this regular working folk, professor? News of Eastwood's attack spread to the London Daily News. In their April 9th paper, they published a letter from a Birmingham resident to a local paper. This person said that George's attackers were part of the Small Heath Peaky Blinders. Mucklow sentenced to 9 months, hard labor for the crime. His accomplices were never caught. It'll be over 2 years before the Peaky fucking Blinders show up back in the news. With Henry Lightfoot. 19-year-old Henry Lightfoot and 18-year-old William Snowball Wright, charged with burglary and assaulting a police officer and a railway porter on September 11th, 1892. When I first read that last sentence, I imagined that the officer and porter were beaten for turning down an offer to drink some beer. Right? Like the Peaky Blinders really fucking hated it if you wouldn't drink beer around them. The officer said he couldn't because, he's on duty. The porter says his wife will leave him. He won't be able to see his two little boys anymore if he starts drinking again. And the Peaky fucking Blinders just call them pussies, asked to see their vaginas, and just beat the both of them half to death. Here's what really happened. A police officer spotted Lightfoot and Wright in Borsley Green, an area about 2 miles from Birmingham city center. He was wanted at the time. Police constable caught William Wright in an outhouse on Glover Street. Wright said he, meaning Lightfoot, threw and hit Salt, a police officer, on the ribs, and I dashed a stone and hit him on the head. Wright said that they did in fact commit the burglaries, but Lightfoot refused to comment. Also, I went to YouTube to try and find out how to pronounce Bosley Green. And holy shit, that area still looks so rough. Some of the top videos that showed up were a video of some kid getting run over, a random stray dog attacking several people on the sidewalk, just a random, fucking large, German Shepherd looking dog roaming about the city attacking people, a street brawl, a road rage incident, a shooting, a bunch of walking tour videos. I clicked on one of the walking tour videos. It seemed harmless and just could not believe how much graffiti and trash on the street. I was nervous for the person taking the fucking video. Doing additional research for this episode did not push Birmingham to the top of my dream travel destinations list. Sorry to any Birmingham listeners, because I know we have some. Please send in some messages. Please tell me I'm wrong. September 20th, 1892, Henry Lightfoot, William Wright, 16-year-old William Sheridan were taken to court for various charges. Thomas Cleaver, a clothing shop owner, was woken up by a crash at his store window September 9th, 1892. Saw that a store had been broken into, saw the three defendants running away, followed them down the road, then Wright began throwing stones at him. The other two also joined in. Cleaver continued chasing them until they threatened to kill him if he kept following them. How pissed would you be if you caught three dudes breaking into your shop? You follow them in the days before you could just easily call the cops, try and get a description or whatever, and they just stop running and start throwing rocks at you. 2 days later, a police constable sees Lightfoot and Wright in the Hay Mills district. Officer asks a nearby man named Canning to help him make the arrests. Lightfoot quickly attacks Canning, hits him twice. How pissed would you be if a police officer asked you to help him, you agree, and then just immediately get your ass beat? Officer then pursued Lightfoot and Wright until he reached some houses under construction. Wright hit the officer on the head with a large stone. Peaky fucking Blinders! Then run to the railway, are tackled by a railway porter, whom Lightfoot also assaults before they escape again. Next morning, the detective arrests Sheridan, who confesses to stealing, but says Wright and Lightfoot led me into it. And then Lightfoot and Wright are caught that same day. All of the men they assaulted were severely injured. The railway porter, or the police constable, had concussions. The porter was left permanently deaf in his left ear. This is a rough name. Sheridan pleaded guilty to burglaries. Lightfoot and Wright pleaded not guilty. Lightfoot pleaded guilty to unlawful wounding. Pretty funny way to describe an assault. Wright pled not guilty. Wrightfoot and Lightfoot were found not guilty of burglary because of lack of evidence. Sheridan was sentenced to 6 months, Wright to 7 months, and Lightfoot to 9 months with hard labor for the assaults. A year later, September 25th, 1893, William Wright, who is now 19, Henry Lightfoot again, who is now 20, they're arrested again with a 19-year-old named John Butler, charged with assaulting a man named William Mitchell and stealing money from him. On September 25th, William Mitchell was playing football, aka soccer, in a field near Byron Road in Small Heath. Wright approached him, said a few choice words, punched him in the face, knocked him down, and then kicked him around for a bit. Lightfoot then ran over, held Mitchell down while Wright put his hands into Mitchell's pockets, looking for money. Lightfoot and Butler then both kicked Mitchell some more. Before they walked off, Wright then confessed to this crime after Mitchell ratted him out to the police. And he said that in December of 1892, his mum had given Mitchell, whom she knew from the neighborhood, 3 pence to buy Wright a dinner while he was in prison. But Mitchell kept that money for himself and didn't say shit to her. Mitchell admitted to that. Said he kept the money because, it was too late to buy food once he made it to the jail. I actually like this beating, right? William Mitchell sounds like a wheezy little bitch. Should have given the money back to the guy's mom. Good for Wright. Mitchell deserved that ass whooping. Butler was discharged for lack of evidence. Lightfoot and Wright, though, held on assault charges. Lightfoot sentenced to a month of hard labor. Wright to 2 months. I bet Wright's mom didn't give Mitchell any money this time around. October 30th, 1895. Now, 2 officers are called to kick out a gang of 20 to 30 Peaky Blinders from the Stag and Pheasant pub on the corner of Bromsgrove and Pershore Streets. Outside the pub, one of the blinders named Warner assaults the officers. When the officers go to arrest him, the gang attacks. 28-year-old James Cusson, kicked Constable Bennett in the stomach. Both Warner and Cusson were arrested. Warner received 6 months, Cusson 6 weeks with hard labor. December 3rd, 1895, old fucking Henry Lightfoot. Oh, Hank. He's back in the news. He just can't stop getting arrested. He becomes one of the first men to actually be called a Peaky Blinder, in print specifically. I love what he got in trouble for. This is maybe my favorite crime of this episode. This time, Lightfoot had assaulted several people inside of a pub with a stick, including the owner and his wife. Dude just literally brought a stick into the bar and started whacking people. I'm going to assume he was hammered drunk when he did this. Just going around beating people with a stick feels like a drunk move. And this isn't all he did. Afterwards, he leaves the pub, stick still in hand, and he just, he just walks up the street whacking anyone he encountered. That's how it's described. Anyone he encountered. This is fantastic. When he eventually crossed paths with a detective whose last name was Tingle, who'd been alerted to some idiot hitting people with a stick, guess what he did? Yeah, he fucking hit him with a stick. He, quote, lifted the stick above his head and discharged a blow, which beat down Tingle's guard and struck his head. Detective Tingle, though, tough guy, then punched Lightfoot in the face, knocked him down. But then one of Lightfoot's Peaky Blinder companions, who'd been following Lightfoot, and I'm guessing strongly encouraged him to keep whacking people with sticks, with a stick, now punches the officer. After a struggle, the officer, must have been one tough son of a bitch, beats them both off, and they're taken to a police station. After all of his previous convictions, the court pronounced that Lightfoot was evidently a Peaky Blinder of a dangerous type that would be sent to jail for 6 months. God, I wish we could magically just have video footage of this stick rampage. Like, if you've ever watched the Peaky Blinders show, you know that for the action scenes, they're heavily stylized. They come across like music videos, right? There'll be some loud, like hard British rock by some band like Royal Blood, just cranking big guitar riffs, and then a lot of slow-mo scenes of violence following some tough words. They remind me of scenes from like Guy Ritchie movies. I would love to see this scene. Just Henry walking into a bar with a stick, and the owner's like, Henry, what you do with that stick in here, mate? Come on now, stop fooling about. Leave the stick outside, all right? No one needs to worry about getting tousled while drinking a pint. Then Henry reacts just way over the top. Fuck you just say to me, Richard? You just disrespect me in front of all these fine people, telling me to leave my fucking stick outside like a fucking child? Like I'm not a Peaky fucking Blinder? And then the bartender's wife just chimes in trying to defuse the situation. No, Henry, he didn't mean anything by it. No disrespect, Henry. We know who you are. We don't want no trouble. Just if you don't mind, maybe just leave the stick outside. Or if you'd like, hand it over to me. I'll put it somewhere safe. You can take it home later. Or hand it over, Maggie. I'll hand it over right quick. Everyone here now gonna get a chance to hold my stick. I'm punishing the whole lot of you by order of the Peaky fucking Blinders. And there's just this long action montage. A lot of slow motion and pivotal moments of Henry just beating the fuck out of everybody around him with his big stick. Teeth flying out of people's mouths, noses getting broken, some dude getting knocked through a window, bartender's wife getting chased around, getting spanked with a stick, and then he just rushes out the door roaring like an animal, chasing anyone he sees, old women, little kids, everyone's getting whacked. I bet Black Young Jen, from last week, from the Moonies, would have loved to be a Peaky Blinder. He would have fucking beat the shit. He'd have his own stick, two of them just going around on a stick rampage. A month later, January of 1896, Peaky Blinders get mentioned in the news again. Correspondent to the Birmingham Mail wrote, in spite of all the energy of the Birmingham police, the present time is a veritable reign of terror, owing to the conduct of the professional rough come Peaky Blinder. The following year, July 18th, 1897, the Peaky Blinders gang commit a much more serious crime. They participate in the murder of a police officer, Constable George Snipe. Officer Snipe was patrolling the city center when he and a colleague were called to a disturbance at a pub on Bridge Street West. Snipe arrested 23-year-old Peaky Blinder William Coleraine for lewd language. And that is a stupid law. Lewd language. In a pub. What dipshit would even complain about that? Man, give officers better shit to do than arrest people for profanity. And you know what? If you're somebody who thinks that it should be illegal to use profanity in public, I want you to do some self-reflection. I want you to ask yourself a few simple questions. Why am I getting so worked up? Right? Over some random word. Why can't I be mentally stronger? And most importantly, why am I choosing to be such a silly little fucking cunt? When Officer Snipe confronted Coleraine, his friends got into a fight with the officer and at least two other officers who accompanied him. One of the gang members threw a brick at Snipe's head, fracturing his skull in two places. Oh my God, getting a brick thrown at you. Snipes died from these wounds next morning. 5 men were arrested in connection to his murder. Thomas Hodges, 21, Charles Edward Elvis, 32, William Coleraine, 23, Thomas Moran, 24, and James Franklin, 19. On July 18th, coroner's jury returned a verdict of willful murder against James Franklin, dude who threw the brick. At a meeting of the Birmingham Watch Committee, July 27th, 1897, the committee discussed George Snipe's murder and the, quote, outbreak of ruffianism in the town. We have too much ruffianism, don't we? The chief constable agreed with the other members that flogging might be a good punishment to stop the attacks and violence against innocent people in Birmingham. And you know what? I'm in favor of it. I like it. I think we should bring back flogging now. At least try it out, a couple years. Would that be so bad? It would be so much cheaper than housing and feeding prisoners for relatively minor crimes, right? And also let them get back to work faster. Like what if, if you're arrested for burglary, instead of being sent to prison for a year or 2 years, you just got flogged in public, like savagely flogged. Not going to die, but it's going to hurt a lot. It's going to be pretty embarrassing. Some Saturday afternoon, you and a few other guilty parties get marched out to some little event space near the town square, some little amphitheater with some stadium seating. There's a band playing, some food vendors. You got fucking street corn and hot dogs and shit. People can buy a ticket to watch it. And then there's some big dude in fantastic shape with a real strong arm, just flogging the shit out of you with a cat of nine tails. Remember that weapon? It's come up in a few sucks. Nice, little leather strands anchored in a handle, each about 12, 18 inches long with knots on the end of them just for extra cracking. They mostly get sold now on BDSM sites, but this is not going to be pleasure through pain. This is just going to be pain. You get tied to some whipping post where your back is exposed. You can't move much to wiggle around from the blows, like they used to do on like pirate ships. And then the big guy just fucking tees off on your bare back. Or, maybe better, your bare bottom. Maybe it depends on the crime. Depends on what you do. Certain crimes you get back. Other crimes, well, you can get whipped on your fucking bare bottom. People attendants are placing bets on how many whips it'll take to draw blood. How much you can endure before the first tear streams down your cheek, you piss or you shit yourself. How much money would we save overall if we did that? How reluctant would you be to rob again? If the last time you got caught, you were beaten until you shit yourself and passed out from the pain. It took damn near a month to fully heal from your wounds. Wounds you have permanent scars from. Right? And a bunch of people around the neighborhood, well, they saw your fucking bare bottom. Yeah, they saw your little fucking kibbles and bits out there bouncing around from the whipping. We should at least try it for a few years. Find out if it's more effective when it comes to recidivism rates and overall costs to taxpayers with crime. Anyway, Coleraine, Hodges, Elvis, Moran were all charged with assaulting Constable Snipe and Frederick Meade, and Coleraine received another assault charge for attacking Constable Charles Clayton. Chucky. The Birmingham Daily Gazette reported that at 10 p.m. July 18th, the defendants were seen by Snipe and Meade near Hockley Hill and Bridge Street West. Quote, their behavior was so disorderly that the officers followed them along Bridge Street West. Eventually, Coleraine used very offensive language, and Snipe attempted to take him into custody. He then became very violent and kicked Snipe severely about the legs. That surprised me when I read that. That was his first go-to move, kicking somebody severely about the legs. Never seen that as someone's go-to move in a fight. The officer threatened to use his staff, and on Coleraine kicking him again, Snipe struck him on the left shoulder. By this time, a crowd had gathered, and someone, as soon as they saw Coleraine strike with the staff, threw a brick, which struck Snipe on the left side of the head. The deceased officer threw his arms up in the air and fell unconscious against someone in the crowd. Man, brick to the head. The defense didn't comment on the person who threw the brick because a man was already committed to the assizes in respect of it. Again, assizes, archaic term for some court sessions. Coleraine then kicked Snipes on the right side of his head. Damn, after he got hit in the head with the brick. Even though he was unconscious, and then attacked Meade. Elvis and Hodges jumped in, hit Meade. I didn't realize Elvis was a British name. Meade blew his whistle for help. Constable Clayton came to help and was kicked by the three men. A lot of kicking. These guys love to kick. Love to throw rocks and bricks and kick. Moran threw stones at the police officers who were following the three men down the street. Snipe briefly woke up in the hospital, said he needed to go back to the crime scene, then lost consciousness again and never woke up. The defense argued that Snipe's death was caused by a blow to the head from the brick, not the kicking to the head afterwards, and none of the defendants, threw that brick at him, which, I guess is kind of fair. All four men found guilty of their charges, but they were not charged with directly causing Snipe's death. Coleraine received an 18-month sentence. Hodges, Elvis, Moran all get 9 months. And then 19-year-old James Franklin they find out he did throw the brick, and he's charged with the willful murder of George Snipe. He pleads not guilty to his trial, which starts December 16th, 1897, while Snipe and Meade were escorting Coleraine to jail and were walking at the junction of Wall Street and Bridge Street. Quote, a brick thrown with very great violence hit Snipe on the left temple, and he fell to the ground almost into the arms of a girl named Polly Mullins. Polly Mullins, what a great name for a Peaky Blinders adjacent character. I probably think that because the BBC show does feature a woman named Polly Gray as a major character, or did. Polly Mullins testified that James Franklin was the one who threw the brick because she saw him following Snipe and saw that he had a brick in his hand. And more importantly, she also saw him throw the brick. Polly picked up Snipe's helmet, ran to the police station. Franklin followed her, demanded that she hand over the helmet to him. When she refused, he hit her in the face. She ran again. He continued following her, threatened to kill her. He snatched the helmet from her hands, threw it on the ground, then jumped on it, then walked away with the busted up helmet. Poor Polly went to the police station, made a report of what she saw. Franklin was charged with murder the next day, but denied throwing the brick. Several witnesses would testify about seeing Frank at the scene, but Polly was the only one who saw or said she saw him actually throw the brick. Defense argued that Franklin was not the one who threw the brick and asked the jury to not let this deplorable state of things prejudice their minds against the prisoner. The defense suggested that Polly Mullins misidentified Franklin because she was paying attention to Snipe, so she wouldn't have seen who threw the brick. Defense also argued that Franklin wouldn't have chased Polly because she could have identified him. The defense called on witnesses to prove that the brick was actually thrown by Black Young Jin, taking some street confessions. No. The defense felt that the brick was thrown by Cloggy Williams, who was missing at the time. Fucking Cloggy. Of course someone named Cloggy threw the brick. That's what Cloggy do. Cloggy throw bricks. You put Cloggy in a room with a goddamn brick, guess what's going to happen? 10 out of 10 times. Yeah, that brick's going to get thrown. A man named Enoch Arthur Smith took to the witness stand, testified that he saw Cloggy throw the brick. Apologies to any listeners named Cloggy, but that's a fucking weird name. 3 more witnesses testified that Franklin was not the one who threw the brick. Another witness identified Cloggy Williams as the killer, but said he initially had denied knowing Williams was the killer because Williams' brother threatened to do him in if he told the truth. That does sound like something Cloggy's kin would say. Witness James Jones was with Coleraine and Cloggy on July 18th. He also testified. He said Snipe told him to leave the area the night he was killed. Coleraine was arrested. The fight broke out. Cloggy picked up a brick, said he was going to, quote, knock out the policeman's brains with it. He stated that Cloggy thought the Snipe was another police officer who had previously put him in jail for 2 months. After Cloggy threw the brick, Jones told him, now you've done something. To which Cloggy replied, he ain't heard much. Ho! Classic Cloggy. He throws a brick, bashes somebody's head in, and then he's like, oh, he's fine. He ain't hurt much, is he? Yeah? He walk it off. That's how Cloggy do. Cloggy throw a brick. Cloggy no care who get hit. Jones said he saw Cloggy the next day, but he hasn't seen him since. Jury now decided that they could not convict James Franklin based on this evidence. Franklin was discharged, and the judge said that the police, if they caught Cloggy, there would be a good deal for him to answer. But you ain't gonna catch Cloggy. Cloggy run. Cloggy hide. Cloggy brick you if you spot him. No, 19-year-old Cloggy Williams was actually eventually found arrested and charged with murder. Oh, Cloggy throw brick. Cloggy get caught. George Cloggy Williams, his hearing now takes place March 17th, 1898. He's found guilty of manslaughter March 18th, the next day, and sentenced to life in prison. The prosecution presented 21 witnesses who testified that the Clogmeister was the killer. They argued that Cloggy had motive because he thought Snipes was another police officer, right, he had beef with. Cloggy's defense attorney blamed Coleraine for the murder, said Williams wouldn't have announced his intentions to kill the officer before doing so, but it didn't matter. Cloggy in jail. Cloggy no have more brick to throw now. July 21st, 1898. An anonymous workman sends a letter to the Birmingham Daily Mail, again referencing the Peaky Blinders, saying, surely all respectable and law-abiding citizens are sick of the very name of ruffianism in Birmingham and assaults on police. No matter what part of the city one walks, gangs of Peaky Blinders are to be seen, who oft times think nothing of grossly insulting passengers by, be it a man, woman, or child. I venture to say that 99 times out of 100, they are not even brought to justice. I get why he sent that in anonymously. How do you put his real name on those remarks? Oh, he's getting bricked. At least he's getting whipped with a belt buckle or beat with a stick. In 1899, Irish police chief Charles Houghton Rafter is contracted to enforce law and order in Birmingham. Put an end to these Peaky Blinders. Sir Charles Houghton Rafter lived from 1860 to August 23rd, 1935. He was originally from Ireland. He joined the Royal Irish Constabulary, the Irish police force, before incorporation into the UK in 1882 when he was just 22 years old. 7 years later, in July of 1899, he applied to succeed Joseph Farndale as chief constable of Birmingham. He was the only man who showed up for his interview wearing his uniform, which impressed the watch committee so much they gave him the position. Sounds like the bar was pretty low when it came to people trying to get this job. What were the other applicants wearing? Right? Applicant 1 shows up just in a kilt, nothing else. Applicant number 2 walks in with pajamas. Applicant number 3 comes in wearing nothing but a ball gag and a butt plug. Why ain't anyone taking this right proper serious like? When Rafter joined the force, there were 700 officers, roughly 1 officer for every 654 people across 14 police stations. The inspectorate of the constabulary criticized Birmingham for being short by about 200 officers. In 1901, Rafter convinced the watch committee to hire 100 extra officers with an additional 20 hires over the next 6 years. By 1935, the ratio changed to 1,587 officers, 1 for every 632 people across 64 stations. When Rafter came to Birmingham, the police force was extremely corrupt. The Blinders routinely paid off the police to look the other way so they could continue with their impressive criminal activity. When people come telling you about me bopping them on the head with a stick, you just say couldn't have been me, because I was with you when that happened, right? Yeah, officer? Here's a shilling for your hard work. During Rafter's time as chief constable in 1911, the city of Birmingham expanded to include numerous new suburbs, and the new area became known as Greater Birmingham. The population increased from 523,000 to 840,000, putting more strain on the police force. Rafter decided to form a branch of mounted officers. He had a lot more police stations built. He was a revolutionary for his time. He made reforms, modernization efforts. He increased benefits for officers like housing and education. Also hired so-called police matrons to look after juvenile and female prisoners. However, under his watch, the violent and often nonsensical petty crimes of the Peaky Blinders would continue. July 23rd, 1901, the Peaky Blinders assault Constable Charles Philip Gunter. Officer Gunter had some brickbats thrown at him. Remember brickbats from the Irish mob suck? Episode 343? Absolutely terrifying. Sometimes the term is used to describe either a piece of brick or a whole brick that you throw. So just, synonymous for a regular old brick. Other times it's a piece of brick that you put into a sock or a handkerchief and then you swing it around like some primitive form of a one-handed medieval flail. That metal, often, a spiked ball at the end of the chain that connects to a wooden handle that you swing around, and just bash people with. That thing. There's some of these brick-related weapons that scare me more than knives or even guns. I would really rather not be bashed with a brick. My son Kyler and I were actually talking just a few hours ago. Like, would you rather be hit with a brick or sliced with a razor, like slashed with a knife? And he actually picked brick, even though it would do more damage and more likely kill him, he said, because a knife, like a razor, is just scarier. Like, all the bleeding is scarier than the bashing you would get with the brick. They both really suck. As horrible as it would be to cut by razor, I might prefer that to being smashed by brick. Officer Gunter, he had his skull fractured by more than one brick blows. He was left unconscious, laying in the street. He was taken to the hospital, had to undergo a trepanning operation, right? Just like poor bastard George Eastwood did back in 1890. That guy who got kicked and whipped with belt buckles had a skull fracture for ordering a ginger beer at a pub. On August 3rd, the police arrested three men, 23-year-old Joseph Addy, 19-year-old George Fowles, and 33-year-old George Galligan. All pled not guilty. Addy and Fowles were identified as being present when Gunter was attacked. Galligan discharged and rearrested later. On the night of July 22nd, Gunter was on duty. He was working with his partner constable, Healy, that night. They separated at 11:50 p.m., just before midnight. Gunter went to the entry of Galligan's home that night because he heard some loud noises. Galligan had met with Addy and Fowles at a public house nearby. They bought beer, went to Galligan's house to drink some more. Galligan bumped into Officer Gunter at the entry and then ran away. Gunter chased after him, but Galligan got away. Galligan returned a few minutes later, though, without his coat. That same night, Officer Gunter also entered the Bruce family home because he heard loud screaming there. What the fuck's going on around here? Addy and Fowles are inside with 5 other people. Gunter attempted to calm things down. Addy and Fowles, others leave, but they then follow Gunter when he leaves. Gunter returns to the Bruce house 10-15 minutes later, bleeding from the head. Witness Emma Butler, who was at the house, testified that Gunter left, men followed, and that she then saw bricks being thrown at Gunter, but didn't see who threw them. I can't believe it took me this long to think of this question, but where the fuck are all these bricks coming from? Like, how are these guys always able to get a hold of bricks at a moment's notice? Was there just a shitload of random bricks laying all about the streets of Birmingham back at this time? Was there little stacks of bricks at the corner of each intersection, you know? Just, little cloggies bricks. Or do these guys just walk around with a satchel full of bricks? It's so odd. When I'm out and about here in Coeur d'Alene, I'm never tempted to throw any bricks, in part because I never see any bricks laying around. Witness named Thomas Smallbone, who worked as a watchman at Perry & Co.'s pen factory at Lancaster Street, testified that on the night of the attack on Gunter, the windows of a factory across the street were broken, and he heard a noise. What do you bet that window was busted out with a brick? Smallbone said he went to the window, saw Gunter, Addy, Fowles, and Galligan fighting. It was reported in the paper, quote, he watched the row, saw the men in the act of throwing, and heard something crash against the boards of the collard opposite. Prior to that, Smallbone had seen a man making brick ends. What the fuck is a brick end? Why are bricks such a prominent part of this story? Also, Smallbone, that's an unfortunate last name. October 1st, the defendants appeared in court. A surgeon testified that Gunter was still in critical condition and, quote, unlikely to ever be quite right in his mind again. It's a quote from the newspaper. Unlikely to ever be quite right in his mind again. I wonder if any doctors still speak like that. What do you think, Doc? What am I looking at? What am I dealing with? I think you're unlikely to be quite right in the mind ever again. Sadly, 25-year-old Constable Gunter did die October 26, 1901 at the hospital from his wounds. In November of that year, a man named John Davis was charged with his murder. Another guy. So many hooligans running around throwing bricks back then. December 14th, 1901, Addy Fowles, this Davis fellow, found guilty of manslaughter, all sentenced to 15 years in prison. Following year, we reconnect with Mr. Lightfoot, old Henry Hits with Sticks. August 26, 1902, Henry Lightfoot, now 31 years old. Joseph Henry Graham, 24. Edward Horn, 25. Henry Butterworth, 22. They burglarize a grocery and wine and spirit store. They steal 8 bottles of liquor. Harry Horley, the store owner, heard a loud crash at 11:30 p.m. August 26. He saw 4 men walking away carrying alcohol. A few hours later, a police officer heard loud noises, saw 4 men walking down the canal at Hay Mills. One of the men shouted at him, "Put that light out or we'll put yours out. You come down here, we'll throw you in the cut." Okay. Officer approached anyway. One of the men then hit him on the helmet with the bottle. That officer is fucking lucky. This was the one time in history a Peaky Blinder couldn't quickly find a brick. Another police officer responded to a distress whistle. Graham and Horn were arrested. Butterworth and Lightfoot then took off through a hedge at the bottom of the embankment. Butterworth was quickly arrested, then fought with the police constable. Lightfoot he got away, probably grabbed a stick, ran off somewhere and hid with it. Graham and Horn escaped on their way to being taken to the police station. They jumped into the canal, swam across, but then another constable arrested them on the other side. What an emotional roller coaster. That would suck. Right? Horn looks back as he swims across the canal thinking he's made it. By order of the Peaky fucking Blinders, we declare ourselves free men. But then he looks ahead, sees another cop just waiting for him. Oh, hell. Lightfoot also soon arrested. He was found passed out drunk. This guy's a fucking mess. He was found passed out drunk, hugging a bottle of sherry. An officer put handcuffs on him while he was still passed out. He didn't seem too upset about being caught. When he came to, his first words were, "Hello, Joe. Clicked again." Guessing clicked was old Birmingham slang for getting arrested, getting handcuffs put on you. Lightfoot and the others deny committing the robbery. All four are indicted for breaking and entering and theft. All are found guilty. Lightfoot is sentenced to 9 months hard labor now and 3 years supervision. Graham and Horn receive 6 months each. Butterworth given 12 months. Lightfoot will be arrested at least one more time. One more time will make the papers. 5 years later, 1907. Such a sad crime. He was caught stealing 12 scrubbing brushes. Oh my God, his fucking life is in tatters. On the afternoon of October 11th, 1904, Ralph Euster leaves his bike outside a Birmingham factory for about 4 minutes. When he comes back out, his bike is gone. He then sees a man turning down another street with his bike. Runs after the thief, but can't catch him. Probably because the guy's, on a bike now. He's on foot. Next day, October 12th, detectives saw a Peaky Blinder criminal mastermind, Harry Fowles, old Hank. We met him before in the timeline. Trying to get rid of this bike, trying to sell it. Fowles is arrested shortly after. Ernest Hayes also arrested. Both plead guilty to bike theft. Fowles blamed Haynes for the theft. Haynes, not Hayes. Haynes was sentenced to 2 months and Fowles to 1 month. A week later, Peaky fucking Blinder Thomas Gilbert, charged on October 18th, 1904, with obtaining various sums of money by false representations. So he's running scams. Alice Robbins reported that her husband was a laborer for the corporation, and she said that Gilbert came to their house August 29th. Alice didn't know him, but Gilbert said he knew her husband. He mentioned he was a head barman until a few months ago when his foot got poisoned. And he said Alice's husband was kind and gave him a shilling. And I think by poisoned, he's referring to maybe an infection. I don't know what else that would mean. Gilbert returned the next day, said he had now obtained a situation with the firm of Aston Brewers. Alice's husband, again out of the house, and somehow he talks her into loaning him 10 shillings so he can buy an overcoat and a suit for his new job. But then a representative of the Brewers, when she contacts him, says, no, we don't know these guys. He's never been hired. Gilbert pleads guilty, is sentenced to 3 months of hard labor for, taking advantage of poor Alice. Trying to help a stranger who guilt trips her. He's a liar. She was not the first person to be scammed by this Peaky Blinder. A detective told the court that in 1903, Gilbert had a great run amongst poor people, to whom he spun a similar yarn to the one which was successful in Robin's case. He occasionally asked for subscriptions towards a cork leg, as in a fake leg, like he was about to have his leg removed because of his poisoned foot and he needed a new leg. He'd been caught scamming before all this as well and received a 1 month sentence. Alice Robbins testified that he had stolen over 2 pounds from her and her husband in cash and over 3 pounds worth of food. Alice sounds pretty gullible. June 7th, 1906, the Birmingham Gazette Express report on some serious Aston assaults. Aston being an area of inner Birmingham. Stephen McNichol, another Peaky Blinder, criminal mastermind, is charged with unlawful wounding. McNichol approached Joseph Dabbs, who was standing on a bridge, and just randomly hit him on the head with some weapon. It's just described as some weapon. What do you bet it was a brick? Dabbs was injured, had to go to the hospital, but was not fatally wounded. McNichol, when asked why he attacked Dabbs, argued that Dabbs sneered at him. Quote, he sneered at me. And then said he also hit him in the jaw, which caused him to fall down and hit his head in the pavement. He was just defending himself. The court thought he was full of shit. They disagreed. He was fined 20 shillings and also had to pay his court costs. And now let's move out of this timeline. Yes, that's pretty much all of the old press we have on these Peaky Blinders. At least the stuff we could find. I'll now cover the end of the Peaky Blinders. We don't have a lot of exact dates for their demise, so just more of a summary, really, so no timeline is necessary.
Good job, soldier. You made it back. Barely.
By the 1910s, leading up to World War I, the Peaky Blinders are overpowered by a new rival, Billy Kimber's Birmingham Boys. Billy being a character in the BBC show based on the real historical figure of the same name. When the Blinders tried to move into the race courses, the Birmingham Boys responded with violence. Too much violence for the Peaky Blinders to handle. Several of the Peaky Blinders moved from the inner city of Birmingham to the countryside, apparently. Truly ran out of town. The Birmingham Boys were the Peaky Blinders' biggest rival in the early 1900s. The gang, also known as the Brummagem Boys or the Brum Boys. It's the Brum Boys, is it? The Birmingham Boys became much bigger, far more organized than the Peaky Blinders ever were. They would go on to expand their territory thanks to new methods of transportation. They were able to move beyond their neighborhoods and into London thanks to a new railway connecting Birmingham and London. Gang took advantage of that to get to the London racecourses. Racecourses were the only place for legal gambling in the area after the passage of the Gaming Act of 1845 and were highly coveted by gangsters. Bookmakers attracted gangs seeking to take whatever money they were making mugging folks or shaking businesses down in their neighborhoods and turn that money into a lot more money. Also, there was a different way they could make money, though, by offering protection. Bookmaking was an unregulated business at the time, making it easy to turn it into an illegal business. With the increase of train routes, all classes could attend the horse races across the country. Loads of people are handing over loads of cash to bookmakers who then have to hire bodyguards to protect them from having some asshole, some peaky fucking blinder, bashing them in the head with a brick and taking their loads of money. Several Birmingham and London gangs seized on this opportunity and offered protection to bookmakers for a cut of their profits, of course. William Billy Kimber, born in 1882 in the Aston area of Birmingham. Billy was both a brass caster and a gang leader. Again, I love that. Love that these gangsters are holding down, full-time straight jobs. Gonna have to wait on the robbery. Gotta wait for my brass caster job to be over for the day. Historian Carl Chin described Billy Kimber as a very intelligent man with a fighting ability, a magnetic personality, and a shrewd awareness of the importance of an alliance with London. Kimber controlled the race courses in the Midlands and North England by allying with gangs in the towns of Uttoxeter and Leeds. For a few years, he may have actually been the biggest crime boss in the UK. Billy's gang was in power from the 1910s all the way to the 1930s when he lost control to the Sabini crime family, who were some mafiosos. The real Peaky Blinders, unlike their BBC versions, never went up against the mob. Definitely never defeated mobsters. They never defeated Billy Kimber in real life. Before getting pushed out by the mob, Billy set up a second base in Islington, North London, to focus on the racetracks in the biggest city in the country. There, Kimber formed alliances with the Hoxton Gang and the Elephant and Castle mob. The McDonald brothers, oh man, not this McDonald, but I wish they were. I would love if Michael McDonald was also a gangster. Don't make me have to take a stick and bash you in the head with a brick. McDonald brothers. That didn't make any sense, I know. Charles Wag McDonald and Wal McDonald. W-A-L. Were the leaders of the Elephant and Castle mob, London gang, that originated in the early 1900s. The McDonald brothers would ally with Billy Kimber in their losing fight against the Sabini gang. Charles Darby Sabini, birth name Ottavio Hanley, was born on July 11th, 1888, died October 4th, 1950. He was an Italian, English, and English mob boss. Sabini was born in London's Little Italy. His biological father is unknown because he was born out of wedlock. It was either Charles Handley, a laborer, or Ottavio Sabini, Maserati, Bugatti, Marcellera, Giovanni, Rosacci, Mario Luigi, Ciao Bella, Antonio Banderas. Masterclass! Yeah, I'm still 100% fluent in Italian. Darby's probable dad, was Ottavio Sabini, an Italian immigrant. His mother was either Eliza Handley or Elizabeth Eliza, and she married Ottavio Sabini in 1889, the year after Darby was born, and Ottavio did consider Darby to be his son. In 1920, Sabini got into a bar fight, the younger Sabini, at the Griffin Public House, where he knocked out an enforcer of a South London gang because the man insulted an Italian barmaid. And now word got around that Sabini was a tough guy. Oh, he was a tough guy. Good, proud Italian. I don't know why I did that. Sabini ended up getting into the gambling business, running the race courses for many years, organizing protection rackets for bookmakers. His gang was also involved in extortion, theft, and running various nightclubs. The Sabini gang, at their height, had an estimated 100 members, as well as some additional hired soldiers from Sicily. Sabini had police, judges, and politicians on his payroll. And for years, Sabini had no competition in South London until Billy Kimber attempted to expand, into his territory. He wanted that racetrack, bookie protection racket cash. Sabini controlled the best pitches at the races and had his men guarding the bookkeepers. All the money Sabini was making got the attention of other gangs like the Birmingham Boys. A gang war starts up between the Birmingham Boys and the Sabini crime family. When Kimber first broke into the London area race courses, he started preying on some Jewish bookkeepers from the East End And then those bookkeepers turned to underworld boss Edward Emanuel for help, and Emanuel recruited the Sabini gang for protection. In March 1921, some of the Birmingham boys ambushed the Sabini gang at Greenford Park Trotting Track in Greenford, London. Following this attack, March 27, 1921, Billy Kimber met Sabini at his apartment in King's Cross in London. Allegedly, he wanted to establish a truce, but one of Sabini's men, Alfie Solomon, shot him. Solomon would later be acquitted for the attempted murder of Kimber after witnesses refused to testify against him. Violence escalated between the gangs following their assassination attempt, and soon 23 Birmingham boys would be arrested after the infamous Epsom Road battle, June 2nd, 1921. The Birmingham boys mistakenly believed that a group of bookmakers from Leeds who arrived in a Crossley tender type car at Ewell, a suburban area of Epsom, a town of the borough of Epsom and Ewell, Surrey, on Coronation Cup Day were actually the Sabini gang. The Crossley was hit by a taxi. Roughly 60 men then attacked the passengers with fucking hatchets, hammers, and bricks. Goddamn. That's a nightmare. There's no good choice. Do you want to be hit with a hatchet, a hammer, or a brick? There's no good answer. And again, these were not Sabini gang members. The gang used taxis, a blue motor coach, to follow the victims that somehow made it out of the initial hits with these weapons and escaped the scene. Wag McDonald fled to Canada after the Epsom Road battle of 1921. He fucking doesn't want to get hit with a hatchet or a hammer or brick. Afterwards, he would move to Los Angeles, end up in Hollywood, become the bodyguard of Charlie Chaplin, and also Jack Dragna, LA's mafia boss. His stories of working for the mafia recounted from his diaries in the book Elephant Boys, Tales of London and Los Angeles Underworlds, written by his nephew Brian McDonald. In August of 1921, Walter Bursford becomes the first president of the Racecourse Bookmakers and Backers Protection Association. This association was set up because bookmakers were forced to pay gangs for protection. The association actually turned to the Sabini gang for protection. Pretty funny. VP of the association was said to be a criminal known as the Jewish Al Capone. In 1921, there was a series of razor attacks and shootings after Sabini appointed some Sicilian mafia members to fight on his side. Razor attacks. Oh man, that does not sound fun at all. 1925, the UK Home Secretary ordered that something had to be done about all this violence on the racetracks. Chief Inspector Frederick Nutty Sharp and his flying squad then began to target the racecourses. There was only about a dozen detectives on the squad, and they were severely outnumbered. Walter, a.k.a. Wall McDonald, took over after his brother left for America. Wall and his men actually defeated the Sabinis in the so-called Battle at Ham Yard near Piccadilly in 1927, but would not win the war against them. 1927, Burt McDonald and Billy Kimber fled to America after they fired shots through the Griffin, a drinking club frequented by the Sabinis, and were worried about retaliation. In the late 1920s, with so much police attention now on the racecourses, the gang started to expand their businesses into nightclubs and casinos. Because Billy Kimber was gone and their new business opportunity was limited due to new legal restrictions, the Birmingham boys fall out of power. Fighting between the gangs, though, will last until the 1930s when the racecourses had increased regulations. Wall McDonald led the gang until his brother returned from the U.S. after murdering the person who killed their older brother Bert during gang wars involving the Dragnas Los Angeles gang in September of 1929. Billy Kimber came back to London after he murdered a man in Phoenix, Arizona, over a gambling debt. 1929, the Jockey Club and the Bookmakers Protection Association took action to prevent Sabini from controlling the best pitches at the racecourses. Police started heavily looking into his illegal racecourse operations, and Sabini now shifted his focus to protection rackets at greyhound races and clubs in the West End. Sabini kept his power mostly due to the fact that he had allied with Jewish bookmakers during an especially anti-Semitic time, and they were very loyal to him. If you're a fan of the Peaky Blinders BBC show, you can see how the show drew from a lot of real criminal history in England, right? They just set the show a few decades later, after World War I instead of before it, when there was more organized crime and there were, more mobsters. There were Jewish gangsters like Alfie Solomon, played impeccably by Tom Hardy, but the real Peaky Blinders, just were not around for that era. Sabini was arrested eventually at the Hove Greyhound Stadium, April of 1940, for being an enemy alien, despite being born in London, not even being able to speak Italian. He was released in 1941 and then arrested again for receiving stolen goods and served 3 years in prison. Then he lost his power to London gang leader Alf White, settled in Hove, Sussex, and worked as a bookmaker after that. Wag and Wall McDonald both died in October of 1940, same month actually. October of 1940, former Peaky fucking Blinder Billy Kimber becomes president of the Devon and Cornwall Bookmakers Association. And then he'll die 5 years later at the age of 63 in 1945 after a long period of illness. at the Mount Stewart Nursing Home in Torquay. Beautiful, beautiful seaside town in Devon, southwest England. And then 62-year-old Sabini dies October 4th, 1950 at his home in Brighton. And that's the end of an era. And what about all the other Peaky Blinder boys? What happened to them? Well, we don't know. Because outside of Billy Kimber, none of them became infamous enough to keep showing up in the historical record. However, we do have an idea of how they faded into obscurity. According to Carl Chin, again, that preeminent Peaky Blinder historian, there were social changes which happened organically. Football became a participatory sport, as well as a spectator sport. Lots of 13, 14, and 15-year-old lads started to play in their dinner hour. And another new sport that was important was boxing and the emergence of clubs. Right, the Football League, FA Cup, and boxing introduced sports to the lower classes more formally. There was an increase in boys and girls clubs as well being built. There was also the cinema, which took up young people's free time and money. In the late 19th century, parks were finally built in the poorest urban areas of places like Birmingham. For example, in 1893, the Park Street Burial Ground in Birmingham was turned into a, quote, health resort for local children. Increased access to education, harsher sentencing policies also decreased the power of gangs in Birmingham. Carl Chin provided statistics for Birmingham Mail, for the Birmingham Mail on crime rates for the late 19th to early 20th century. In his opinion, these stats show the rise and fall of Birmingham gangs like the Peaky Blinders. In 1867, there were 400 police officers and 465 assaults on constables, when the population was 325,000. In 1873, police numbers were up to 450 assaults. There was 450 police officers, and they faced 473 assaults, when the population was 350,000 strong. The number of assaults in 1878 was 478. There were 279 more in 1883 as a result of a more gentle police approach and fewer open spaces where gangs could congregate. 1899, there were 557 convictions for assaults on the police at a time when there were 685 officers in a city of 500,000 people. And in 1919, there were just 134 convictions against 1,341 officers in a city that had grown rapidly to a population of 900,000 people. And then finally, for what numbers he provided, in 1934, only 96 convictions in a population of 1 million. So the officers are being beat much, much less. Yeah, Birmingham changed. The city and various philanthropists invested more in building city parks, establishing various sports leagues, youth clubs. They gave the youth of Birmingham more to do, more to feel good about. It's a good lesson that we can apply today, right? Just continually. In America, elsewhere, where crime rates are high for young people, want to keep more kids from committing violent crime and ending up dead or in prison? Well, give them hope. Invest in them. Give them something to feel good about. Let them star in a sports league. Let them be the man there, as opposed to having to fight for the title of the toughest, baddest motherfucker on the block. Let them throw footballs and baseballs instead of bricks. Let them swing rackets on a pickleball court instead of a stick in a pub. Although that is pretty funny. Give them a boys and girls club where they can spend time in the weight room or take classes or, help get into college with some kind of mentor, as opposed to, battling other kids in some fucking cemetery that's supposed to be a park. Peaky Blinders were not some cool, stylish gang. They were largely violent kids and young men who desperately wanted to feel good about something, and dressing up in dapper suits and beating motherfuckers with bricks made them feel cool and tough when they didn't have a lot of other methods and other ways to feel cool and tough. The gangs of Birmingham, like the Peaky Blinders, were a direct result of severe poverty that many experienced in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. There just wasn't a lot to be had in the inter-industrial slums of Birmingham. And by the 1870s, so-called slogging gangs formed in response to that. Gangs of young people getting together to fight, steal, rob, assault. These sloggers fought each other for control of territory in the city as their criminalism, evolved. The gang version of kind of King of the Mountain. Who's the baddest? Who's the best? Who controls their neighborhood? Who controls the most neighborhoods? From these sloggers soon emerged a new type of gangster, the Peaky Blinder. Peaky Blinders, they did the same shit as the sloggers before them, just dressed differently, a little more stylishly, which a century later would make for a great look on TV. But they didn't have razor blades in their caps. Instead, they used their boots, belt buckles to beat victims and rivals alike. A lot of bricks being thrown, especially Cloggy. Fucking Cloggy. That's what Cloggy do. Cloggy throw bricks. The Peaky Blinders first mentioned in the press by name March 24th, 1890, when poor George Eastwood violently assaulted for having a soda at a bar. Various members of the Peaky Blinders, Henry Lightfoot, Thomas Mucklow, Harry Fowles, Ernest Haynes, George Williams, others would make headlines for assault, theft, and sadly the murders of some police constables over the following 2 decades. And then the Peaky Blinders just faded away. which is good, right? They sounded like some real assholes. Carl Chin writes, the show is compelling and powerful, and it's been brilliant for Birmingham, but there's also a need to discuss the reality behind it. They were not glamorous or honorable. They were horrible men. Yeah, they really were, Carl. They were well-dressed, brick-throwing, stick-swinging, women-beating, foul-mouthed cunts. Time now for our takeaways.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Number 1, the Peaky Blinders. First mentioned in the Birmingham Daily Mail for the assault of George Eastwood, who encountered them in a bar in Birmingham. George left the bar. He was followed, violently assaulted, skull fractured by some belt buckles. Spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Only Thomas Mucklow was arrested for this murderous assault, and he was sentenced to 9 months in prison. Number 2, the Peaky Blinders had a signature style that distinguished them from other Birmingham slogging gangs. They dressed like the wealthy did, in overcoats, peaked caps, bell-bottom trousers, boots, and silk scarves around their necks. But despite popular belief, there was no razor blades sewn into their caps to slash unsuspecting victims. Number 3, the Peaky Blinders, born out of the slogging gangs of the 1870s. Groups of violent young people in the slums of Birmingham joined one another for fighting, assault, robbery, theft, and rioting. Sloggers would work odd jobs by day or full-time jobs at various factories and plants in the industrial, rapidly growing city, and then gather together after work or on their days off to commit some mayhem. Number 4, Billy Kimber was once a Peaky Blinder, but then formed his own gang, defeated the Peaky Blinders, and traveled to London, where he became one of the most powerful organized crime leaders in the country. He moved into the London race courses, forced bookkeepers to buy his protection. This led to conflicts with the Sabini gang, who were doing the same shit. 2 gangs and their allies engaged in bloody battles and shootings for a decade until increasing policing and regulations shut down their business operations. And number 5, new information, historian Carl Chin's great-grandfather was a Peaky Blinder. Chin has been researching the Birmingham gang since the 1980s. He claims to have over 40,000 letters from people who have shared personal stories about the street gangs. Many of those letters written during the era of the Peaky Blinders by people who were either members or had run-ins with members. Chin has said, my dad was president of the Birmingham Bookmakers Protection Association, and he put me in touch with a load of old bookies. Through them, I was put in touch with the younger brother of the real Alfie Solomons, who I interviewed in 1986. They also put me in touch with Dave Langham, whose father was George Langham, real name Angelo Giancali, one of the men in Sabini's gang. So in the 1980s, I was already writing about the racecourse war that erupted in 1921 between Sabini and Solomons on one side and the Birmingham gang led by the real Billy Kimber. Chin's great-grandfather was Edward Derrick. Carl Chin described Edward Derrick as a man who brutally beats his wife Ada regularly. He's a horrible, nasty, wife-beating thug. He's my great-grandfather. Edward Derrick came from a troubled family. Edward's grandfather was constantly in and out of jail. His grandma also convicted of theft. His dad fined for assaulting a police officer. Edward's older brother, John, also charged with assaulting a police officer. Edward Derrick was born in 1879. By the time he was a teen, he was well on his way to earning a lengthy criminal record. In 1893, he was convicted of vagrancy. 1894, spent 7 days in prison for stealing food. A few weeks later, sentenced to 4 months hard labor for burglary. These are all like crimes of poverty, it seems like most of them. 1897, received a 5-month sentence with 2 years supervision for stealing a bike. 1898, sentenced to 12 months for breaking into a counting house. 1899, assaulted a police officer. 1900, arrested for public drunkenness. 1901, under the alias Frederick Pitt, sentenced to 3 years for bodily harm. 1906, received a 2-month sentence for stealing a basket carriage. 1907, Edward Derrick meets Ada Weldon, and he will be the worst thing that ever happened to her. Edward was extremely violent and abusive. He would come home drunk often. Ada and her daughter Maisie would often sleep in the communal wash house or out in their yard or at a neighbor's house to hide from him. Ada divorced him in 1922. Since 1913, Edward had failed to provide food and clothing for his family. Derrick went on to become an illegal bookmaker in the 1920s, and the crime didn't stop with Edward Derrick. Carl's relatives, Alf and Wal Chin, owned an illegal betting shop called Turf Accountants. They had a phone number posted outside to help them look legitimate. In May of 1961, they became a legal betting shop, and then Carl Chin himself ran that shop from 1978 to 1984 until his family sold the business, and then he dedicated much of his life to historical, Peaky Blinder-focused research, and I thank him for that decision because without him, this episode would not have been possible.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
The real Peaky fucking Blinders have been sucked. Sorry if I just ruined the show for you. They were not actually that cool. Some pretty funny crime stories, though. Thank you to the Bad Magic Productions team for all the help in making Timesuck, such as Queen of Bad Magic, Lindsay Cummins, running operations around here, Logan Keith, recording this episode, designing merch for the store at badmagicproductions.com. Thank you to Olivia Lee for the initial research today. Also, thanks to the All Seeing Eyes moderating the Cult of the Curious private Facebook page, the Mod Squad making sure Discord keeps running smooth, and everyone over on the Timesuck subreddit and Bad Magic subreddit. And now let us dig into this week's Timesucker updates. Oh, I'm going to start off with a real entertaining one.
Updates? Get your Timesucker updates.
First up, holy shit, Richard Bird, Dick Turd, the gift that just keeps on giving. True crime lover Eric Lawrence shared a message with me a few hours before Logan let me know what a bunch of people in the Cult of the Curious Facebook group were fired up about. He writes in with the subject line of holy fucking shite comments. You fucking got Morgan, you bastard. So I'm welding this morning, listening to my favorite pods, Timesuck being my fave, and one of my other faves, Human Monsters, is reporting on who, of all killers? Richard fucking Bird. LOL, you got the internet, Dan. Love you, man, from Eric and Golda in Woodstock, New Brunswick, Canada. Eric, thank you for the message. Thank you, Golda. And thanks to everyone else who alerted us. Yeah, this is wild. So on Wednesday, May 22nd, the Human Monsters podcast, which I was not familiar with, released an episode called Double Trouble Part 11, like Roman numeral 11, if you want to look it up. And at 30 minutes and 33 seconds in, the host, Morgan Rector, starts talking about Richard Bird as if he is a totally real serial killer. At various points, he just is straight up reading off of the script I wrote for that episode. And I've heard that he uses a researcher, and clearly he is not checking their work. I don't know if he's using this researcher anymore. They may have gotten fired. If they were working for me, yeah, they would be fired for that. For anyone wondering, I'm not mad that he plagiarized me. You start just presenting other people's work as your own, and you'll eventually get caught with the internet today. And the situation, I think, will just work itself out. And I'm hesitant to go after people like that because I myself, God, I was just talking to Lindsay about this the other night. I've had people be like, oh, hey, man, funny bit. You stole that from so-and-so. So many times they're talking about somebody else doing a bit that came out after my bit. It's like a lot of people who make these accusations just don't think it through, don't really do their research. In this situation, though, yeah, he absolutely did steal from me, clearly. If I'm him, if I'm Morgan, I'm worried about my credibility now. Right? I'm thinking like, oh, fuck, what else have I gotten way wrong? And what he did illustrates why I still spend so many hours poring over every script our research team hands into me before ever sharing it with you. I fact check them always. I do additional research. I don't always get it right. I'm human, but I do think probably 99% of the time I get it right because I put in that work every week. You know, I'm not going to say who did it, but a few years ago, someone did hand me a script full of so many errors. It was because their sources were clickbait articles, and they were almost fired that day for that. And then it never happened again, right? And I have notes for the episode. You know, we pride ourselves on accuracy and transparency. You ever want to see the notes for any given episode, just email us at bojangles@timesuckpodcast.com. We used to put them on the Timesuck app. I don't know if I've heard that app might not be in the store anymore. It just wasn't worth all the work it took to kind of keep the app going, so we're not using that anymore. But we do still have notes, you know, PDFs of notes for every single episode. And then they're written like a research paper. You know, most episodes you would be able to see are pulled from literally dozens of sources. Okay, like for this one today was a challenge to kind of give a cohesive narrative to, because no single source provided very much information at all about the Peaky Blinders. Thank God newspapers.com exists. This huge database you can have a membership to, where you can pull up articles from newspapers all around the world. There is key searches done. Oh, it's without it, probably, I don't know, a fifth of our episodes we just wouldn't be able to do. So you can go to these, like, you know, articles from like the late 1800s and actually see what was written. And that's what Olivia did. Probably like, I don't know, 15, 20 different, you know, old newspaper articles that she pulled from, at least 15, I would guess. And then a whole bunch of just like random sources, and then all compiled together, and then, you know, verified, and, you know, watching YouTube video documentaries to understand more of the context, maybe pull out more information. And then you put together like a cohesive, hopefully compelling narrative. And we do that every week because I care a lot about consistently getting it right. Right? It's what I do. It's also just a point of pride. I don't want something to happen like what happened to this podcast as Human Monsters. And that being said, it does make me so happy that it did happen. And I truly hope that other podcasts, and ideally also YouTubers, other content creators, also plagiarize Richard Byrd. And I just, based on watching a lot of other people's stuff, it does seem like a lot of them just like quickly grab whatever's easy and do use each other and just like don't verify and just like, yep, I'm just going to say the same thing this person said. So I hope that it happens with Richard Byrd, because the more it happens, the more the internet will present it as if it's real information. There's going to be kids doing fucking book reports about Richard Byrd. I hope that eventually somebody, like a little get together, comes up to me and is like, hey, have you ever heard of Richard Byrd? You should do an episode about him. That'd be so fucking great. Yeah. And this just, this happening just makes me want to beat the drum more of preaching about, doing your own research about whatever you're trying to find out about on the web, whatever you're trying to learn about. With the rise of AI and more people leaning on AI, and AI not being able to decipher good from bad sources, there's going to be a lot more shitty information on the web going forward. And people are going to have to work a lot harder than ever before to really look for legitimate sources. And don't trust this fucking bullshit about like universities and, basically all of mainstream media being incorrect. There's a lot of good journalism being done by mainstream media. It's not a popular thing to say right now because fucking wackadoodles are ideal fans because they don't care about truth. And they just love just hearing this, narrative of like, the mainstream media is fucking out to get you and it's a bunch of bullshit. No, there's a lot of good journalists who went to school for it, who have degrees, who take it very seriously. Do they always get stories right? Do they have bias? Yes. Sometimes they do have bias. They don't always get stories right. Do they get stories right more often than some random fuckhead on some weird 4chan site posting bullshit? Yes, they get it right more than that. And, in universities, there are databases and there's, just like people who write well-reviewed books that are reviewed by, the Washington Post and the Times. They're not all putting out disinformation. I think they're way more credible than just bullshit on like, YouTube. So yeah, you gotta do your homework if you want to try and get it right. Now another short message from serial killing tracking meat sack Patrick North, who writes in with a subject line of Robert Pickton update. Just an update you've probably already seen, followed by this link to an AP News article. That's actually another good source, apnews.com. Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton assaulted. And then signed off a Coco Corrector. Good reference to the coconut called Patrick. Patrick, thank you. Yeah, we got a few heads up about old Bobby Willer. Bobby Willer. How about put on a house boots coming from Bobby Willer? Yes, serial killer Robert Pickton. That fucking filthy son of a bitch. From episode 237, The Pig Farmer Killer. Canada's filthy Robert Pickton. Never come across a dirtier killer, like literally dirty. Has been beaten and imprisoned within an inch of his life. The 74-year-old's on life support currently, as I record this, is also in a medically induced coma after being brutally attacked by another unnamed 51-year-old inmate. The sister of one of Pickton's victims told CBC News in Canada that she felt relieved and happy when she heard that the serial killer had been attacked. Tammy Lynn Papin, sister of Georgina Papin, said on the Tuesday of the week of the attack, I said, good for him, he deserved it. I don't wish harm on anybody, but karma, Yeah, no, he fucking did deserve it. That filthy sociopath. He claimed to have killed 49 women, one shy of his, quote, goal of 50. Yeah, he's a real piece of shit. Is a real piece of shit. He was charged with 26 murders, convicted of 6 that there was the most evidence for in 2007. So that was some good news. And now one more from Ty Olson. A Cummins Laud meat sack who wrote him with the subject line of, I got Cummins Laud in front of a priest. Dear Suckmaster and Lord of the Wide-Eyed Molly Gaze. First, I have to say that me and my soon-to-be wife have been fans since 2022. We love both Scared to Death, Is We Dumb, rest in peace to the funniest, dumbest podcast, and also, of course, Timesuck. I started with Scared to Death and then was indoctrinated into the Timesuckers cult of the curious by the soon-to-be wife with the Las Vegas shooter Timesuck and haven't looked back since. First off, I agree with Kenny Dumbfuck McDuff serving the death sentence, or deserving the death sentence. That man was pure evil. I also hated that his mother, Addie Assface, defended him and gave new meaning to entitled prick, thinking that he was so good that everyone was after him when the dumb fuck was being the biggest piece of shit and thinking he did nothing wrong. Second, I have a story to share with you. I love hearing all of the fellow space lizards' moments of embarrassment when they've been Cummins Lawed. Never thought it would happen to me, but it did. Small bit of background. I graduated college during the pandemic, and because of this, there were not many opportunities for me when I left. Due to this, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I stayed at 2 companies from 2022 to 2023. Both ended up either closing their doors or were touting layoffs. That layoffs would be occurring. I finally was able to find my passion in helping people in higher education. However, my first job brought me to a religious college. I was surprised. I didn't burst into flames. And I always joke about praising Jeebus when we have a meeting. This is where my story of embarrassment begins. Normally in the mornings, I will drive into work and listen to the new Timesuck Scared to Death on my 30 to 45 minute drive. When I got to work, I got out of my car at the same time as one of the brothers, a church priest who also works at the college. He was heading into the building. As we are having small talk about our mornings and the drive up there, I must have hit play on my phone accidentally while it was in my pants pocket. It happened to be on full volume. Guess what you happen to be promoting? Oh yeah, the law offices of A. Cock and Butts. Thanks for that. I immediately turned red, tried frantically to hit pause. The priest looked at me and was like, "Oh, are you listening to a podcast? Is it good?" Very nonchalantly, like nothing weird had happened. I then went, "Yeah, I have a lot of different podcasts, but this one's my favorite." Trying to play it off like nothing happened. He then goes, "Yeah, I don't listen to podcasts much, but it's nice to hear your podcasts are promoting local law offices like that." Always have to support those small businesses. I had to contain my shit-eating grin. If the priest saw, I'm sure I would have had to, I would have had like 6 to 9 Hail Marys. So instead I said, "Yep, he really likes to support those hardworking small businesses that always look to satisfy their customers." The priest then goes, "It's always good to have satisfied customers." I shit you not. I had to drop off my stuff at my desk, stifling my laughter, head outside to my car and laugh my ass off. Also, my mom visited Italy last month and gave me a gift. See attached if you dare. No, I did look. It's a statue of David kitchen apron with his little dick prominently featured. And I always say this when I wear it. Maserati Bugatti spaghetti, Maserati Bugatti spaghetti, Maserati Bugatti spaghetti, Luigi pizza pie. 3 out of 5 stars, wouldn't change a thing. No apologies for the length. You deserve this lengthy hog. Feels like an item you need if you go to Italy with the family. Also, could you give a shout out to my soon-to-be wife, Holly? We get married this fall, and I wouldn't be in this cult without her. We love listening to both Scared to Death and Timesuck all the time, and it was a way we bonded more when we were dating and still do. Hopefully we get to join you, Lindsay, and fellow Timesuckers at next year's summer camp. Fuck yeah. Love you, Holly, and thanks, Dan, for being the best sucker master. Lindsay and crew, you rock as well. Stay awesome, Lord of the Suck. Say hi to Lindsay from Ty and Holly. Oh, done. Ty, you are so nice. Thank you for such a great message. Congrats to you and Holly. Hello, Holly. Thanks for being weird enough to bring Ty into this shit show. Also, Ty, was that priest maybe hitting on you? Right? Feeling you out? I mean, come on. Who hears a commercial for the law offices of A. Cock and Butts and does not realize it's a joke? Especially when you talk about customers being satisfied. Hope he was oblivious, though. That makes it funnier to me. Thank you for the message. Thanks to everyone who sends in messages to bojangles@timesuckpodcast.com. And yeah, and thanks for the heads up about the human monsters situation.
Thanks, time suckers. I needed that.
We all did.
Thanks for listening to another Bad Magic Productions podcast. Scared to Death, Timesuck each week. Short Sucks and Nightmare Fuel on the Timesuck and Scared to Death podcast feeds some weeks. Please do not throw a brick at anyone's head this week. You can kill them. Just don't throw any bricks at all anywhere this week. How about you throw a frisbee instead? Get outside. Enjoy your summer. Do something gentle. And keep on sucking.
Bad Magic Productions.
I think the pub stick attack is what's going to stick with me most from this week. I have some questions, like what kind of stick was Henry Lightfoot carrying when he walked into a pub and just started whacking? I hope it was a tree branch that he either found on the ground or on the way to the pub, or maybe better, broke it off a tree and then just thought once he saw it, you know what I should do? I should walk in the bar and fucking hit people with this. Also, if you didn't get your ass beat or arrested, how fun would it be just to start whacking people with impunity? Just to walk into a random bar and start hitting people with a stick. And then once you've hit everybody there, ideally in this fantasy, they're just all cowering. But please don't hit me with that stick. And then you just walk out, walk down the street and you just hit anyone you fucking see. I mean, before you got arrested, what a good time. What a laugh he must have had. I don't think I've ever watched a grown man, hit another grown man with a stick. I don't think I've ever watched any grown up hit another grown up with a stick or anyone else, especially a stranger. But now I very much want to see that happen. I tried to find videos of it, at least on YouTube. I couldn't find just a random stranger being hit, by another stranger. I did find a YouTube video, it was pretty satisfying, of a guy who tried to rob a 7-Eleven, and then he got beat with a stick by one of the employees. One employee held him down, while another employee hit him with this stick that looked like a broom handle for, I'm not joking, 3 minutes straight. Fucking 3 minutes of just getting hit with a stick, all in the lower body. Just hit him from the waist down, mostly in the legs and the butt, like he's being spanked. And he literally started to cry and begged to be, please stop hitting me with the stick. It was pretty entertaining, but I want to see it in real life. If you have any stick whooping stories, please send them in.